Chapter 1398. Time passed extremely quickly. In the blink of an eye, Xiaohua had been in seclusion for more than half a year in this abandoned cave. In this half-year, Xiaohua cultivated day and night. In addition to the basic cultivation methods, the dragon transformation art, and so on, he also cultivated some of the basic magic techniques. He even read a lot of the book he obtained from the Zhu family. It could be said that he had a direct impression of the Dawn Rain continent. As for Xiaohua's cultivation, in this half-year, he had steadily advanced from the early third level of Qi, refining to the middle third level of Qi refining. Although this kind of advancement was very common for ordinary cultivators with sex, for Xiaohua, it was an enormous breakthrough. However, after reaching the middle third level of Qi refining, Xiaohua had no choice but to come out of seclusion. The reason was very simple. The medicinal pills in his space were gone. Since Xiaohua began his seclusion, because he had a fire attribute cultivation method suitable for his cultivation progress seemed to be faster than before. Therefore, when he cultivated, the medicinal pills he took weren't as extravagant as before. He only took one out when necessary. However, his medicinal pills were still limited. In half a year's time, the marrow-cleansing pills and clear ripple pills in his space were all consumed by him. There were only a few dozen foundation establishment pills left. After stopping taking medicinal pills, Xiaohua felt that his cultivation had begun to progress at a tortoise's speed. Xiaohua, who had already adapted to taking medicinal pills and cultivating at the same speed as ordinary cultivators, was somewhat dissatisfied. Speaking of medicinal pills, he could still refine them. Xiaohua had the alchemy technique, the alchemy furnace, and the spiritual herbs in his space. Refining medicinal pills shouldn't be a problem, right? This was what Xiaohua had planned to do half a year ago. However, when he truly began to refine medicinal pills, he discovered that he had a huge omission, and that was the earth fire used to refine medicinal pills. Refining ordinary medicinal pills, such as the parasol pill, blood replenishing pill, and so on, didn't require earth fire. It was possible to use some fire talismans to refine them successfully. However, marrow cleansing pill, clear ripple pill, and other medicinal pills that could increase one's cultivation needed earth fire. Moreover, the alchemy furnace that Xiaohua obtained was so big. The saltpeter and 3 yang talismans that Xiaohua purchased weren't enough to warm the alchemy furnace, let alone refine medicinal pills. Of course, after Xiaohua discovered this problem, he was extremely depressed, but at the same time, he didn't stop studying alchemy, as well as understanding this alchemical furnace. Fortunately, he was able to find the method to refine this alchemy furnace on the inner wall of the alchemy furnace. Moreover, he also knew the name of this alchemy furnace and the general method to use it. This cauldron was called the 3-legged vermilion bird phoenix pattern cauldron. The little bird on top of the cauldron looked like a vermilion bird, and the 5 openings around the cauldron were arranged according to the 5 elements. This 3-legged vermilion bird phoenix pattern furnace could refine high-level pills, but the prerequisite was that the furnace had to be refined first. Otherwise, it could only refine low-level pills. As for this low-level pill, it wasn't the low-level pill that Xiaohua had in mind. Although the introduction didn't go into detail, it did mention a high-level pill, the nascent soul pill, that was used by nascent soul stage cultivators. Then what was this low-level pill? Was there still a need to explain? This discovery also made Xiaohua's extremely depressed mood slightly better. After all, he had obtained a high-level item. Yes, although his cultivation was still very shallow now, and his spiritual power was a little bit short of the requirement to refine this alchemy furnace, the alchemy furnace was in his own space. Even if he didn't refine it, he couldn't refine pills. Others couldn't even see it, so it couldn't be said to be snatched by others. In addition to the basic cultivation method, the dragon transformation art that Xiaohua practiced seemed to have some progress. Why did he say it seemed? Because the dragon transformation art was used by the meridians to transform into dragons. Xiaohua hadn't found the key to it yet. He only felt that the dragon transformation art could be used, and there were no abnormalities in his meridians. As for where the progress of half a year of cultivation was, Xiaohua didn't know. Perhaps it was because the time was too short. Xiaohua stood up and walked away. Looking at the very tidy cave, he smiled and said to himself, "This cave is really not bad." I wonder which senior left it behind. Of course, it would be best if he left behind a cultivation method or something like that. However, according to what Kaijwaxia said, this cave, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth isn't very abundant. It's also not an excellent place for cultivation. My cultivation speed is like a tortoise. I'm afraid it has something to do with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It seems, if I really want to find a place to cultivate for a long time, I should find a place with abundant spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Yes, in addition, it's best if there's earth fire. Soon after, Xiaohua pushed away the boulder blocking the cave and walked under the sunlight. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes to enjoy the warmth of the sunlight for a while. Xiaohua then opened his eyes and looked at the clear blue sky. He secretly said, "It's already been more than half a year. This Kaijwaxia, why hasn't she sent me a message talisman? Could it be that she has already given up? Or the other person hasn't been found? Yes, who is that person?" Listening to what she said, it should be related to alchemy. Thinking that it was related to alchemy, Xiaohua's heart suddenly stirred. If I can go with them, maybe I can get some information from that cultivator. Even if it's some information about earth fires, it would also be good, right? Previously, when Kaijwaxia invited Xiaohua, he didn't want to go no matter what and only wanted to build a cart behind closed doors. Now, they didn't come looking for him, but he was thinking about it himself. However, it was already half a year later, and Kaijwaxia still hadn't sent a message. If there were no accidents, she must have already gone. Xiaohua pondered for a moment and sighed slightly. After basking in the sun for a while, he also returned to the cave. The problem of medicinal pills must be solved. Clear breeze pills are suitable for third-layer qi refining cultivators. I must go to the exchange market and exchange for some. Xiaohua sat cross-legged on the shabby praying mat and pondered. However, there really aren't many medicinal pills that can increase cultivation. I can only get them by bidding in the exchange market. Others can see the effect with just 1 or 2 pills, but I have to use dozens of pills. The exchange market is not a good place to go. I still have to think more about alchemy. Xiaohua himself also knew that being able to buy a large amount of marrow-cleansing pills and clear breeze pills from the Feng clan's exchange market was a lucky thing. He couldn't always come across them, so he could only place his hopes on alchemy. In the space behind his head, there were actually many spiritual plants. At this time, they were all several hundred years old, and some were even close to 1,000 years old. However, even if he had these spiritual plants, he couldn't guarantee that he would be able to exchange them for a suitable amount of medicinal pills. Moreover, if these scarce spiritual plants attracted disaster, wouldn't it be even more unprofitable? I forgot. The spiritual plants in my space are all very old. If I need to exchange them for spirit stones or do some other things, it really won't be easy to take them out. I still have to plan ahead. Xiaohua previously only wanted to use these spiritual plants for alchemy. He simply didn't think about exchanging them. Therefore, the spiritual plants in his space grew without being picked. Now that he thought about it, it was still somewhat inappropriate. Therefore, after thinking for a while, he picked some of each spiritual plant. After a period of time, he would pick some more. This way, he would have spiritual plants of all ages, and it would be convenient to exchange them. What is this thing? When Xiaohua was sorting out and picking the spiritual plants, he naturally had to look at the rainbow cloud that had already been transplanted into the space. That ugly rainbow cloud was no longer as weak and small as before. It seemed to be overflowing with vitality. Moreover, the rainbow on top of the sphere had also become a lot bigger. The most peculiar thing was that the surface of the rainbow cloud was gradually revealing some strange runes. Those runes were faintly discernible and weren't particularly clear. As for what surprised Xiaohua, he discovered that on the stem of the rainbow cloud, there were actually 2 thumb-sized insect eggs. Where did these insect eggs come from? Xiaohua frowned as he tried to recall, but very quickly, Xiaohua understood that this egg must have been brought in with him when he transplanted the rainbow epiphyllum from Yunqi Marsh. Moreover, it must have been laid by the water-pattern butterfly that had attacked him. No wonder when I walked so close, the water-pattern butterfly didn't attack. It seems that it was laying eggs. Moreover, when I took away the rainbow cloud, The water-patterned butterfly's crazy attack was also for these insect eggs. I was careless and actually caused its home to be destroyed. Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh and cry. Forget it. Even if I go to Yunqi Marsh now, where will I find the mother of these two insect eggs? I can only treat them well and raise them as butterflies. Xiaohua secretly comforted himself. But at this moment, he suddenly thought of something and was dumbstruck for a moment. Of course, it was precisely this question that lit up his mind like lightning. My space. How can I put living things in it? Xiaohua was completely dizzy. At this moment, he also remembered that when he put the Ice Worm King's egg into the space in Nankaiping, he already faintly felt that something was wrong. This was because although the Ice Worm King's egg was damaged, it still had vitality and couldn't be casually placed in a storage bag. It was just that the situation that day was urgent, so he didn't think too much about it. Now that he thought about it, how did the space in his mind become a storage bag? But then, Xiaohua didn't understand. The storage bag was specially used to store spirit beasts, such as Fei Qing from the spirit husbandry sect. Anything that wasn't a spirit beast couldn't be placed in it. In other words, things that could be placed in the storage bag couldn't be placed in the storage bag, and things that could be placed in the storage bag couldn't be placed in the storage bag. But why did this rule change when it came to me? Xiaohua was stunned for a long time before he came to his senses. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Indeed, he didn't have much to think about. He didn't know the origin of this space at the back of his mind at all, so all kinds of strange things were normal. Another few days passed, and Xiaohua's cultivation still didn't make much progress. He had no choice but to leave the cave abode again and prepare to make a trip to Jinghua City's East City to try his luck and see if he could exchange for a clear breeze pill. Just as he flew into the air, there was a change in his mind. Didn't Kai Zhuoxia leave me a message talisman? She didn't come to find me, so why can't I go find her? As he thought, he took out the summoning talisman and urged it with his transcendence energy. The summoning talisman flew into the air. However, the summoning talisman didn't fly too far. It only flew a few li to Xiaohua's left before stopping. -5. Chapter 1399. In less time than it took to eat a meal, Kai Zhuoxia flew over. Seeing Xiaohua's flabbergasted expression, Kai Zhuoxia giggled and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, could it be that you're the only one allowed to advance to the middle stage of the third layer of the aura refining realm, but I can't also enter closed-door cultivation?" Xiaohua looked at Kai Zhuoxia's peak fifth layer of the aura refining realm and said with a bitter smile, I cough. I only thought fellow Taoist had already gone to the sobbing mountain range. I simply didn't expect fellow Taoist to be nearby. Could it be that fellow Taoist already picked some mother-child spirit fruit? What does fellow Taoist Xiao think? Kai Zhuoxia didn't answer and instead asked a question. This? Xiaohua slightly frowned, but he immediately smiled and said, if fellow Taoist Kai went to the sobbing mountain range, presumably you would have greeted I. Since I didn't receive any message from fellow Taoist Kai, presumably you still haven't gone to the sobbing mountain range, right? Kai Zhuoxia clapped her hands and said, worthy of being the fellow Taoist I think highly of. Fellow Taoist Xiao, fellow Taoist actually believes in I so much. This really makes I gratified. How could Xiaohua think so much? It was just that he saw Kai Zhuoxia's cultivation increase, and inside his jade bottle was a foundation-building pill. He reckoned Kai Zhuoxia's jade bottle was about the same, so he casually asked. Just as Xiaohua smiled and wanted to say something, he suddenly froze and said involuntarily, fellow Taoist Kai, could it be you took a foundation-building pill? Hearing this, Kai Zhuoxia slightly sighed. She neither nodded nor shook her head. She only raised her eyes to look at the clouds in the distance. After a long while, she said, I wanted to take it, but I know my cultivation level is too low. The medicinal power of this foundation-building pill is far from what a fifth layer of the aura refining realm can bear. Oh, Xiaohua nodded, but Kai Zhuoxia immediately said, I can only take 20% of a foundation-building pill. 20%? Xiaohua said involuntarily, fellow Taoist Kai, still took it in the end. What will happen when you build your foundation in the future? Foundation? Kai Zhuoxia said self-mockingly, fellow Taoist Xiao, how confident you are that you can cultivate I to build foundation. Xiaohua shook his head slightly. This cultivation level was truly far away, so how could he know? 10%. Kai Zhuoxia raised a finger and said without hesitation, my Kai family's cultivation method only goes up to the 10th layer of qi refining. I have only cultivated up to the 5th layer, and I have been stuck at the 5th layer for many years. If I can't break through in a few more years, then I will only be able to cultivate up to the 8th layer of qi refining. Furthermore, even if I were to reach the 10th layer of qi refining, I would still be unable to reach the 12th layer of qi refining by relying solely on the techniques of the Kai clan. Foundation establishment is nothing but a pipe dream. Rather than that, I might as well use the foundation establishment pill to increase my cultivation, Kai Zhuoxia said in disappointment. I believe that fellow Taoist Xiao also understands I's urgency to obtain the embryonic breathing pill, right? Xiao Hua was speechless and could only nod slightly. Compared to Kai Zhuoxia, he was even more pitiful. Up until now, he only had a low-level cultivation method that could allow him to cultivate up to the 5th layer of qi refining. If Kai Zhuoxia only had a 10% chance of reaching foundation establishment, then he himself didn't even have a 5% chance. No matter what, ever since I met fellow Taoist Xiao, I's good luck has been unceasing. Not only did I obtain the keepsake of Old Man Thousandjiang, I also escaped death on Thousandjiang Peak and obtained some foundation establishment pills. Presumably, with fellow Taoist Zhao's company, that mother-child spirit fruit will also be easy to obtain. In the future, when I reach foundation establishment, I will also have a lot more confidence, Kai Zhuoxia said with a smile. With fellow Taoist Kai's auspicious words, I also hope that everything will go smoothly and I will reach foundation establishment as soon as possible. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said with a smile, all right, since fellow Taoist Xiao has come out of seclusion, then, let's go to Sabing Ming Mountains together according to what we agreed on half a year ago. Kai Zhuoxia stared with her big eyes, looking forward to Xiao Hua's answer. I will listen to fellow Taoist Kai's arrangement. Kai Zhuoxia was overjoyed and said with a smile, with fellow Taoist Zhao's help, this alphabet spirit fruit will certainly be easy to obtain. Immediately, under Kai Zhuoxia's lead, the two of them flew towards the northwest. On the way, Xiao Hua very casually asked about the other person that Kai Zhuoxia wanted to invite. Contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, that person wasn't an alchemist like Xiao Hua had imagined. Instead, he was the same as Kai Zhuoxia, a disciple of a cultivator family. His name was Yin Liwei. Seeing Xiao Hua's very strange expression, Kai Zhuoxia finally told him the reason. As it turned out, although this Yin Liwei's cultivation was only at the 7th layer of the qi refining realm, he was the nephew of a foundation establishment alchemist from Xuanyin School. Kai Zhuoxia wanted to use Yin Liwei's relationship to ask that alchemist from Xuanyin School to refine embryonic breathing pills for her. AI. So that's how it is. After he understood, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. He didn't think that nepotism was so important in the cultivation world. It seemed that his idea of learning alchemy was going to fall through. After several days of continuous travel, they arrived at a place with beautiful mountains and limpid waters. A large village appeared in front of the two of them. This is the Yin clan. Kai Zhuoxia pointed at the continuous village and said, this is where the clansmen of the Yin clan who don't cultivate live. Their disciples who truly cultivate are all in the valley behind the village. It's said that the valley has a formation set up by a gold core senior. Ordinary people can't casually enter. After flying close to the village, Kai Zhuoxia landed on the ground. There were already several young people who looked very capable coming up to greet her. Seeing that Kai Zhuoxia was a female cultivator, a girl around 20 years old stepped out from the crowd and said in a soft and clear voice, I am Yin Feng. Greetings to the female immortal. May I know why the female immortal has come to visit my Yin clan? Kai Zhuoxia nodded slightly and said, I am a disciple of Liu Yang's Kai clan. Previously, I sent a letter to your honorable senior martial brother Yin Liwei. Now, I've come as promised. Oh, so you're looking for martial uncle Yin. The girl, Yin Feng, looked at Kai Zhuoxia several times, and then looked at Xiao Hua. She smiled and said, Martial uncle Kai, please follow disciple to the village and wait for a moment. Disciple will immediately send someone to invite martial uncle Yin. Thank you for your trouble. Kai Zhuoxia nodded slightly, and then saw the two young disciples quickly walk into the village. Yin Feng accompanied Kai Zhuoxia as they slowly walked forward. When they arrived at the small pavilion in front of the village, Yin Feng took out some spirit fruits for Kai Zhuoxia and Xiaohua to enjoy. She and the other disciples accompanied them. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, a slightly frivolous voice sounded, "Io, fellow Taoist Kai, I received your message and have been thinking about you day and night. I've always been looking forward to your arrival. Who would have thought that you would delay for half a year?" Xiaohua didn't turn around and frowned slightly. He thought to himself, this guy, is he a cultivator? But when he looked at Kai Zhuoxia, he didn't see anything strange on her face. Presumably, she didn't find this strange. He stood up from his chair and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Yin, I had some mundane matters to attend to and was delayed. Sorry for making you wait." Xiaohua also stood up and turned around to look. It was a cultivator dressed like a young master. He was holding something that looked like a folding fan in his hand and was swaying as he walked over. This cultivator's eyebrows were raised, his pair of peach blossom eyes were slightly narrowed, and his nose was tall. He looked very handsome. "This fellow Taoist is?" Yinli didn't return the greeting. His left hand lightly waved the folding fan, and his peach blossom eyes looked at Xiaohua strangely as he asked Kai Zhuoxia. "He, fellow Taoist Yin, this is fellow Taoist Xiaohua. I invited him to help." Kai Zhuoxia didn't reveal Xiaohua's background and vaguely said, "Help? With his cultivation?" Yinli curled his lips and said without any trace of politeness, "My Yin clan has plenty of disciples like him. If you want to help, I can grab a bunch of them. Why would I need him?" Fellow Taoist Kai, are you not at ease with I?" Kai Zhuoxia quickly waved her hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Yin is a disciple of a famous clan. How can I not believe you? It's just that I owe fellow Taoist Xiao a favor. I have no choice but to invite him. Consider it as returning the favor." "Greetings, fellow Taoist Yin." Xiaohua understood and cupped his hands in greeting. "Fellow Taoist?" Yinli snorted from his nose and sat next to the two. He said, "You're only at the 3rd level of qi refining. If you were in my Yin clan, you should call me Martial Uncle. Even if you're outside my Yin clan, you should still call me Senior." "Fellow Taoist Yin." Kai Zhuoxia was afraid Xiaohua would get angry, so she quickly smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, our friendship is shallow. I hope fellow Taoist Yin can forgive me for calling you fellow Taoist." That's fellow Taoist Kai's friendship with him. What does it have to do with I? Yinli picked up a spiritual fruit from the stone table and put it in his mouth. He said noncommittally. Kai Zhuoxia smiled bitterly and gave Xiaohua a meaningful look. It seemed she didn't want to make things difficult for Xiaohua. Xiaohua sneered in his heart. He was very clear in his heart. If Li Zongbao from the Utmost Happiness faction saw this situation, wouldn't he have already beaten this guy black and blue? "I'm just asking for some embryonic breathing pill. There's no need to give Yinli any face." Just as Xiaohua frowned and was about to speak, Yinli opened his mouth again. He flipped his folding fan and pretended to be magnanimous. Forget it. I am also a disciple of a cultivation family. How can I lower myself to the same level as you, a little rogue cultivator?" Kai Zhuoxia didn't explain Xiaohua's background, but Yinli Wei seemed to understand. Then, he said to Kai Zhuoxia, "Half a year ago, fellow Taoist Kai told this poor Taoist about this matter. This poor Taoist has already considered it. If we go together, fellow Taoist Kai will have to give this poor Taoist 70% of the pills." "What? 70%? Kai Zhuoxia didn't wait for Yinli Wei to finish speaking and said in surprise, "Didn't I say 50%? At that time, didn't fellow Taoist Yin also not object?" Yinli Wei seemed to have already expected Kai Zhuoxia's surprise. He didn't panic at all. He lightly waved his folding fan and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Kai, think about it. You just told me the whereabouts of that thing, and I still have to accompany you. I also have to take the risk to pick it. After picking it, I still have to beg the elders of my sect to refine it. From beginning to end, fellow Taoist Kai is only leading the way. I still have to take care of fellow Taoist's safety. You say, 50%, is it appropriate? Of course, if fellow Taoist Kai is willing to dual cultivate with I, then I naturally won't bicker with fellow Taoists so much. Dual cultivate. Xiaohua was very happy. He thought of the dual cultivation technique in his space, and also thought of Li Zhongbao's furious appearance. -5. Chapter 1400. Kai Zhuoxia's face was slightly red, but she wasn't angry at all. She looked at Xiaohua helplessly, then turned around and said with a smile, I originally wanted to give 20% to fellow Taoist Xiao, but fellow Taoist Yan's method of distribution, how can I deal with myself? Haha, isn't this good? Fellow Taoist Kai and I are of one mind. Isn't this 30% exactly what fellow Taoist Kai wants? Yin Liwei laughed and pointed his fan at Xiaohua. This guy is a burden. Why are you bringing him along? Even if you want to return his favor, you can just give him 1 or 2 pills later. Besides, with his cultivation, there's no reason to waste pills. Xiaohua's expression changed, and Kai Zhuoxia hurriedly said, Fellow Taoist Yin, you can say that, but isn't fellow Taoist Yin taking a bit too much? I put in the most effort, so I naturally take more. If fellow Taoist Kai isn't willing, we can go our separate ways. Yin Liwei said without hesitation, as if he knew Kai Zhuoxia wouldn't leave in a huff. Sure enough, Kai Zhuoxia clenched her teeth, pondered for a moment, and said to Xiaohua with a bitter smile, Fellow Taoist Xiao, it seems I can't fulfill what I promised you before. If fellow Taoist thinks it's not worth it, it's not too late to withdraw now. Kai Zhuoxia didn't tell Xiaohua about the split before, but the information about the mother-child spirit fruit was obtained from the things Xiaohua gave her. Since she didn't say anything, it should be the two of them splitting it equally. Now, Kai Zhuoxia was willing to split it equally with him. It was only about 10% of the Dan, but it was still far from what he thought before. But Xiaohua looked at Kai Zhuoxia's appearance, then looked at Yin Liwei, and his heart was clear. Kai Zhuoxia pulled him, first, to return his favor, second, to pull him in as a helper. What she had to resist was precisely this Yin Liwei. If he withdrew, Kai Zhuoxia would be in an absolute disadvantage. But if she didn't find Yin Liwei, how could she find an alchemist who could refine pills? Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, Ai's cultivation is shallow. I'm afraid 1 or 2 pills will be enough. If fellow Taoist Kai doesn't mind, I'm still willing to take a trip. Kai Zhuoxia's face was filled with joy, and her eyes were filled with gratitude. She smiled and said, Thank you, fellow Taoist Xiao, for helping me. Help? Li Yinwei sneered. I am the one helping. Forget it. Forget it. It's between the two of you. It has nothing to do with I. Yin Liwei stood up and said, If fellow Taoist Kai doesn't object to I's suggestion, let's make a vow. All right, I'll listen to fellow Taoist Yan's arrangements. Kai Zhuoxia nodded deeply. Thus, the two of them clapped their hands and made an oath. Shortly after, they said sternly, Fellow Taoist Kai, please wait for a moment. I's things will follow you immediately. Yinwei left for the time it took to finish a meal before he returned with a storage pouch hanging from his waist. He smiled and said, Let's go, fellow Taoist Kai. Let's go quickly and return quickly. My martial uncle Yin might come to the Yin clan in a month or so. If we can take advantage of that time to find him, I'm afraid we have a 70% chance of success. Kai Zhuoxia beamed with joy and said with a smile, That's great. That place, we should be able to return within a month or so. Return within a month or so. Yin Liwei's eyes turned a few times before he smiled and said, I'll have to ask fellow Taoist Kai to lead the way. Soon after, the three of them flew into the air. Kai Zhuoxia accompanied Yin Liwei and led the way. Xiaohua silently followed behind them, secretly putting some distance between them. This Xiaohua actually has some real skills. A 3rd-layer ore refining cultivator can actually catch up with a 5th-layer ore refining cultivator. Yin Liwei was originally disdainful of Xiaohua, but when he saw that Xiaohua's flying speed wasn't slow, he couldn't help but be secretly shocked. Although he wanted to test it out, Kai Zhuoxia didn't fly fast at all. Yin Liwei pondered for a moment and eventually gave up. After flying like this for several days, Xiaohua faintly felt that something was wrong because the direction they were flying in seemed to be different from the direction Kai Zhuoxia told Xiaohua. Although Xiaohua couldn't distinguish the specific direction, he had a general idea. Sure enough, after another day, when Kai Zhuoxia suddenly changed direction and flew in another direction, Yin Liwei's expression slightly changed. He asked with extreme displeasure, "Fellow Taoist Kai, what do you mean by this? Could it be that you don't trust one?" "Of course not. In this country of Shi, if I can't even trust fellow Taoist Yin, who else can?" Kai Zhuoxia said with a smile. "However, this trip is really important to I, so I have no choice but to be a bit more cautious. TSK, isn't it just embryonic breathing pills? My martial uncle Yin has plenty of them. Who would be greedy for your few?" Yin Liwei said disdainfully. Kai Zhuoxia smiled but didn't say anything. The three of them flew for an entire day. When the sky gradually darkened, they found a cave where the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was slightly denser. Each of them took a cave and prepared to adjust their breathing and rest. Yin Liwei was different from the previous few days. He patted his storage pouch and took out several yellow talismans from within. Urging his transcendence energy, the yellow talismans all turned into green and lustrous balls of light and sank into various parts of the cave. Then, he made a few more at the entrance of the cave. Finally, he took a slightly larger yellow talisman and steadily entered the cave. Looking at Yin Liwei's somewhat strange behavior, Xiaohua asked in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Kai, this fellow Taoist Yin, what is he doing? It seems to be similar to a warning talisman." Fellow Taoist Xiao is right. This is a special formation talisman. Its function is extremely different from a warning talisman. The warning talisman only serves as a warning, but this formation talisman is used to set up a formation. Looking at fellow Taoist Yan's appearance, it seems that he has set up formation talismans all around the cave. The cave is enveloped by his formation talismans, and no external objects can enter. Strange, why didn't he take it out a few days ago? Xiaohua was somewhat baffled. Kai Zhuoxia slightly shook her head. I don't know. Maybe it's because we're about to reach the sobbing mountain range. Xiaohua disagreed, but he also couldn't think of any other reason. Thus, he returned to the nearby cave. Xiaohua was very simple. He directly used several large rocks to block the entrance of the cave. Xiaohua practiced a series of basic cultivation techniques and spells. He also practiced that indescribable incantation for a while. Xiaohua had been practicing this indescribable incantation for more than half a year. He himself couldn't tell what specific effects it had. He only felt that his ears and eyes were somewhat clear, and his spirit was extremely good. If it was another cultivator, wouldn't they have already given up? Xiaohua didn't have too many cultivation techniques to practice. Since he felt that it was useful, he persevered and practiced it. Just as Xiaohua was reciting the incantation, he suddenly entered a very strange state. It was as if his eyes and ears could leave his body. He could perceive everything inside and outside the cave. Of course, this kind of perception was vague and couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Divine sense? Xiaohua's heart stirred. His first reaction was that he had divine sense. However, he immediately shook his head inwardly. That divine sense should be able to see things outside the cave. I can only sense things, but I can't clearly see them. It's still far from the legendary divine sense. At this moment, there was an extremely slight movement outside the cave. Xiaohua immediately sensed it. Thus, Xiaohua stood up and walked to the cave entrance. He looked outside through a crack in the mountain rock. It was already night. The moon didn't show its head. The entire outside was pitch black. But in the pitch black distance, he could faintly see a figure slowly flying away. Isn't this Yin Shenwei? Why is he going out? Xiaohua thought and wanted to push the mountain rock away. But when his palm touched the mountain rock, he changed his mind. He brushed his hand and took out an Earth Escape talisman from the space. He slapped it on his body and urged his magic power. A familiar feeling appeared again. His body sank into the ground. Following the direction of Yin Shenwei's vital energy, Xiaohua hid on the ground and slowly searched. Yin Shenwei quietly flew in the air until he was about 1 mile away. Then, he stopped. He looked left and right and didn't find anything unusual. He walked to a big tree and stretched out his hand. After drawing a strange mark on the big tree, he took out a yellow talisman. He opened his mouth and said a few words on the yellow talisman. Then, he placed the yellow talisman in a small hole in the tree. Then, he looked left and right again and quietly flew back. After he disappeared for the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua's figure slowly rose from the ground. Xiao Hua looked at the direction Yin Shenwei disappeared, and then looked at the place where Yin Shenwei was standing. He smiled bitterly in his heart. This guy, what is he trying to do? No matter if it's the mother-child spirit fruit or the embryonic breathing pill, he has 70% of them. Is there a need for him to do anything? The night was extremely dark, and Xiao Hua was underground, so he didn't see what Yin Ganwei was doing. Xiao Hua looked around the big tree, and then wandered around for a while, but didn't find any clues. He couldn't help but wonder, this guy, what is he doing here? Maybe, if I wait here, I can find something? Xiao Hua thought. He hid his body well, and waited to see who would come here. However, after waiting for almost a night, he didn't see anyone coming. Xiao Hua looked at the bright sky in the east, and then went back into the cave. Although he didn't find anything, how could Yin Shenwei suddenly come out from the cave in the middle of the night for no reason? If something is unusual, it must be a demon. When the three of them moved, Xiao Hua wanted to find a chance to explain to Kaizhuoxia. However, Yin Shenwei and Kaizhuoxia were flying in front of him. Xiao Hua didn't have a chance to explain. In the next few days, Yin Shenwei didn't go out at night. Instead, he was very quiet. Yin Shenwei didn't have any unusual behavior. Xiao Hua didn't want to tell Kaizhuoxia anymore. He couldn't figure out, what was Yin Shenwei's purpose? Or maybe, this guy just got up to relieve himself? However, just when Xiao Hua was hesitating, something happened again. Similarly, Kaizhuoxia also changed her direction. Yin Shenwei's face was like frost. Only this time, Yin Shenwei didn't say anything. He just looked coldly and was extremely silent. Kaizhuoxia originally wanted to explain, but looking at Yin Shenwei's expression, she didn't want to explain. However, at night, Xiao Hua stared at the cave where Yin Shenwei was resting for a long time and didn't see him come out. -5. Chapter 1401. Huh. Maybe. I've really wronged him. As Xiao Hua thought about this, he sat down cross-legged and calmly cultivated the nameless chant. However, when he entered a meditative state, all the movements in his surroundings were reflected in his mind. He suddenly discovered that there seemed to be some fluctuations of spiritual energy about 10 feet in front of his cave. Those fluctuations gradually moved further and further away. This guy. Xiao Hua opened his eyes. He also realized that he had an Earth Escape talisman. Yin Yinwei naturally had one too. He was definitely escaping far away. Xiao Hua thought for a moment, then came out of the cave. He walked in front of Kaizhuoxia's cave and called out softly, "Fellow Taoist Kai." After a moment, he heard Kaizhuoxia reply from inside, "Fellow Taoist Xiao? Do you need something?" Looking at Kaizhuoxia's appearance, her expression was somewhat gloomy and her eyes were slightly red. She didn't look like she was cultivating at all. Xiao Hua was stunned, but then he acted as if he hadn't seen anything. He said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Kai, fellow Taoist Yin, isn't in the cave. If he isn't, then he isn't. What does that have to do with anything?" Kaizhuoxia thought Xiao Hua would say something important, but when she heard this, her face became slightly unhappy. "It's like this, fellow Taoist Kai. Last time when you changed directions, fellow Taoist Yin went out and happened to be seen by I. However, I followed him and didn't see anything. So I didn't tell fellow Taoist. Now that fellow Taoist just changed directions, fellow Taoist Yin actually went out again. I feel that there's definitely something fishy going on." Is that so? Hearing Xiao Hua say that he saw Yin Yinwei go out twice in a row, and both times happened after she changed directions, Kaizhuoxia couldn't help but become vigilant. But then she said doubtfully, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I was also cultivating in the cave. How could I not notice? Moreover, fellow Taoist Yin is inside the talisman. If he went out..." Kaizhuoxia didn't suspect Xiao Hua, but she didn't understand how he knew. Xiao Hua said with a smile, "The first time was when I casually looked outside the cave during a break in cultivation and discovered fellow Taoist Yan's whereabouts. Just now, of course, I paid special attention." Then he pointed at the cave and said, "If fellow Taoist Kai doesn't believe me, why don't you go over and shout?" Kaizhuoxia trusted Xiao Hua very much. She walked to the front of the cave where Yin Liwei was and called out a few times, but there wasn't any sound from inside the cave. Ah, thank you, fellow Taoist Xiao. Kai Zhuoxia sighed and shook her head slightly. I don't understand. He has already taken 70% of the mother-child spirit fruit. What else does he want? I don't understand this either, but he definitely had a premeditated plan. Fellow Taoist Kai, it's better for you to make plans early. Xiao Hua saw that his goal had been achieved, so he cupped his hands in salute and turned around to leave. By the way, fellow Taoist Xiao, I remember that the first time I changed directions, there was no moon on that night, right? It was such a dark night, but fellow Taoist was actually able to see clearly? Kai Zhuoxia suddenly asked. This? Xiao Hua stared blankly. Soon after, he said, it's normal for cultivators to be able to see with their eyes, right? Yin Yanwei is a 7th-layer qi refining cultivator. How can he walk like a normal person? Kai Zhuoxia pursed her lips and laughed. Besides, the full moon is overhead today. He shouldn't fly out of the cave, right? Just as Xiao Hua was about to speak, his expression suddenly changed, and he flew back into his cave. Upon seeing this, Kai Zhuoxia knew that Yin Yanwei had returned. She didn't ask any more questions and hurriedly flew back into the cave. After returning to the cave, Kai Zhuoxia didn't do anything. She only focused her attention on the outside of the cave, wanting to see Yin Yanwei's movements. But after listening for the time it took to eat a meal, the outside was quiet, without the slightest sound. Ah, this Xiao Hua. Is Shang Huoming's disciple who hasn't entered the sect yet? In the end, Kai Zhuoxia sighed and rubbed her eyes that had long since become dry from crying. She forced herself to calm down and cultivate. At daybreak the next day, Kai Zhuoxia saw Yin Yanwei and smiled as usual. Fellow Taoist Yin, did you rest well last night? Because he was used to asking about it every day, Yin Yanwei didn't have the slightest doubt. He shook his head and said, last night, I worked hard in the cave for an entire night. My cultivation didn't advance an inch. Ah, to be honest, if it wasn't for this, I might not have been able to come to fellow Taoist Kai's matter regarding the mother-child spirit fruit. That's good. I also encountered the same bottleneck as fellow Taoist. I hope that this time, the search for the spirit fruit will go smoothly. Kai Zhuoxia nodded. In the next few days, Kai Zhuoxia didn't change her direction, and Yin Yanwei also didn't have any abnormal behavior. Xiao Hua also paid more attention to the nameless mnemonic chant while cultivating. On this day, he saw a vast expanse of green in his field of vision. That green was like a green cloud, accumulating in the distance, making people feel a kind of earth-shattering freshness from the bottom of their hearts. Sobbing Ming Mountains? Yin Yanwei saw and couldn't help but be stunned. He turned his head and asked, is the mother-child spirit fruit here? Kai Zhuoxia smiled and said, it is here. It can't be. My family's senior came to Sobbing Ming Mountains many times before and never saw the mother-child spirit fruit. Moreover, Xuanyan School also has disciples who are training here, and I've never heard them mention it. Yin Yanwei didn't believe it too much. If anyone can know about it, then wouldn't this information be worthless? Kai Zhuoxia said mysteriously. Then please lead the way, fellow Taoist Kai. Xiao Hua saw that Kai Zhuoxia still led Yin Yanwei to Sobbing Ming Mountains and wasn't surprised. He didn't believe that Kai Zhuoxia, knowing that there was a problem with Yin Yanwei, would still give him the mother-child spirit fruit. As expected, the three of them flew for more than half a day. When night fell, they arrived at a hidden mountain stream. The mountain stream gurgled and flowed out from a crack in the mountain wall. The surroundings of the stream were lush and verdant. Countless thriving weeds, brambles, and shrubs grew. In addition, there were also many vines growing out from the mountain wall. They flew through the air and hung on the thick trees in the surroundings. This place. Yin Yanwei saw that Kai Zhuoxia found a hidden place and was originally somewhat happy. But looking at the surrounding situation, this wasn't a place where the spirit fruit grew. Fellow Taoist, please wait a moment. Kai Zhuoxia said to Yin Yanwei with a smile. She turned and walked in front of a stone wall. Just as Kai Zhuoxia turned around, she inadvertently glanced at Xiao Hua from the corner of her eyes. Xiao Hua also blinked his eyes, indicating that he understood. He also inadvertently crossed his hands behind his head with a relaxed appearance. Kaixuoxia faced the stone wall and held her breath for a moment. She formed a seal in her hand and urged her magic power to hit the stone wall. In the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, Kaixuoxia didn't know how many seals she had hit on the stone wall, but that stone wall didn't have any reaction at all. Seeing Kaixuoxia's performance so hard, Xiaohua laughed until his belly split open, but Yin Yinwei, who was at the side, frowned tightly. When Kaixuoxia's forehead was covered in sweat and she retreated, Yin Yinwei quickly stepped forward and asked, "Fellow Taoist Kai, what's going on?" Cough cough, fellow Taoist Yin. I also don't know what's going on. It's obviously here, but that seal, it doesn't work. Kaixuoxia panted slightly and smiled apologetically. Fellow Taoist, don't worry. The place is right, and the seal is also right. I can't open it for no reason. Wait for I to rest for a while, then I'll try again. Yin Yinwei's face changed slightly, but he endured it and nodded. I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist Kai. Kaixuoxia rested for a moment, then stepped forward again and hit the blank stone wall with a series of seals. But the result was naturally to no avail. When Kaixuoxia turned around dejectedly, Yin Yinwei's face was gloomy and uncertain. Fellow Taoist Yin, I am really sorry. I really didn't expect that the information was actually fake. I've made fellow Taoist Yin come here in vain. Yin Yinwei stared into Kaixuoxia's eyes, and Kaixuoxia still didn't fear him. After a long while, Yin Yinwei sneered and said, "Since it's like this, can fellow Taoist Kai show me the jade slip or book that recorded this information? Perhaps we can find the real place by brainstorming together." I can't agree to fellow Taoist Yan's request. Kaixuoxia's face changed slightly, and she smiled apologetically. I've already looked at this thing no less than 10 times. The place and the seal are absolutely correct. Fellow Taoist Yin, please believe in I. I believe in you, but I don't believe in this place. Yin Yinwei suddenly became angry. He slapped his hand and took out a fireball talisman. Kaixuoxia and Xiaohua were greatly alarmed. They both retreated half a step, but their hands weren't slow either. They wanted to take out a yellow talisman, but Yin Yinwei's fireball didn't fly towards them, but directly hit the stone wall. With a loud boom, a large hole the size of a bowl was actually blasted into the blank stone wall. But that was merely a large hole created by the explosion. There was nothing else strange about the stone wall. It really is the magic power of a 7th-layer Qi refining cultivator. This mid-grade fireball talisman was actually used by him to such an extent. Xiaohua thought, somewhat flabbergasted. Hee, how is it, fellow Taoist Kai? The place you chose is still wrong. Why don't you take it out and let I examine it together with you? Yin Yinwei said coldly. How could Kaixuoxia be willing? She resolutely shook her head. Fellow Taoist Yin, perhaps I have comprehended it incorrectly. However, I still hope that fellow Taoist can give me a few more days. Once I find the correct place, I will immediately inform fellow Taoist. Ha ha ha, Yin Yinwei faced the sky and laughed, saying, You stinky girl, your face looks like a village girl. No matter how you look at it, you don't look like a female cultivator at all. You make I lose my appetite. Kaixuoxia's complexion greatly changed. Just as she was about to speak, Xiaohua rushed to Kaixuoxia's side, pulled her sleeve, and said in a low voice, Let's go. There's a 5th-layer Qi refining cultivator flying towards us from behind. Right now, Kaixuoxia didn't have the time to investigate how Xiaohua sensed a cultivator flying towards them from behind. She herself didn't know anything. She hurriedly urged her magic power, and her figure flew up, wanting to escape into the sky. Yin Yinwei had already noticed. Seeing Xiaohua fly up, he shook his hand, and a fire net talisman appeared, covering the two of them from top to bottom. Right at this moment, 2 rough and obscene voices simultaneously sounded. Fellow Taoist Yin, were those 2 adulterous men and women executed? He looked left and right, but other than a few unlicensed taxi drivers, there was no one else. Third Tanhua very decisively dialed 999, but before 999 arrived, the woman started to wobble again. Third Tanhua advised her to sit on the ground and rest while waiting for the ambulance, but the woman's face was blank. Moreover, She continued to walk crookedly towards the entrance of the district. Most importantly, one of the woman's handbags was thrown on the ground. She simply didn't know about it. Third Tanhua wanted the unlicensed taxi driver next to him to help look after the handbag, but the driver waved his hand and didn't say a word. Third Tanhua was helpless. He could only carry the handbag and chase after the woman. Fortunately, just as the woman left the district, she sat on the ground again, and the ambulance arrived. Third Tanhua hurriedly placed the handbag next to the woman and told the ambulance what happened. He even asked the district security guard next to him to call 110, and he left. Third Tanhua's heart still had lingering fear. He didn't know if the woman's handbag had a problem and if she would blame it on him. -5. Chapter 1402. The Blue Twin Bears? This obscene voice was extremely familiar. Xiaohua recognized it immediately. Not to mention Kaizhuoxia. Kaizhuoxia's face was already slightly pale, as if she was very afraid of the blue twin bears. Quickly leave. Xiaohua was also greatly alarmed. He only thought that Yin Ganwei had a backup plan, but he didn't expect it to be an old enemy. That day, he tricked the two of them, causing them to flee with their faces covered in dirt. When they realized what had happened, didn't they still want to grind his bones and scatter his ashes? Now that he saw it, how could he not know that the two of them had already colluded with Yin Ganwei? They wanted to take Kai Zhuoxia's life, and he was a pitiful fish in the pond. However, Xiaohua knew that the blue twin bears hated him even more than Kai Zhuoxia. Yin Ganwei's fire net talisman was indeed fast. With a shake of his hand, it covered the top of Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia's heads, and in the blink of an eye, it fell a foot above their heads. But the scene before his eyes was absolutely out of Yin Liwei's expectations. Xiaohua was like an arrow that left the bow, his figure flashing rapidly. His hand pulled Kai Zhuoxia's sleeve, and in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, he actually narrowly avoided the fire net talisman. Don't think of leaving. Yin Ganwei saw this and was more surprised than angry. Although he had heard the blue twin bears say that Xiaohua's flying speed was fast, in his eyes, Xiaohua was only a little thing in the first layer of the Qi refining realm. Although he was now at the third layer of the Qi refining realm, he was only a toy in his hands. It was impossible for him to be his opponent. He only needed to let go of his strength and not let him get close to him, and he could easily deal with him. Who would have thought that Xiaohua would actually escape from his plot? How could he not have the intention to kill him? Yin Ganwei shouted loudly, the magic power in his body surging, fiercely urging the flying talisman, quickly chasing after Xiaohua. At the same time, he waved his hand, took out the ice thorn talisman from his storage bag, and stabbed it towards Kai Zhuoxia's back. The blue twin bears also didn't hesitate, similarly waving their hands, and several yellow talismans shot out. Their target was Xiaohua. Xiaohua didn't care about them. His figure flew, his speed comparable to the peak of the Qi refining realm. In the blink of an eye, he flew a distance of 10 feet. However, at this moment, something embarrassing happened. With a tearing sound, Kai Zhuoxia's sleeve was actually torn off from her Taoist robe by Xiaohua's great strength. Beneath Kai Zhuoxia's great shame, she was even more alarmed. Just now, she had already aroused all of her body's magic force and used it all on the flight talisman. That speed was something she had never achieved in her entire life, but even so, she was still far inferior to Xiaohua. Unexpectedly, Xiaohua's speed had ripped off her sleeve. Kai Zhuoxia's complexion was slightly dark, but the skin on her arms and forearms was sparkling and translucent like jade. For a moment, they were all exposed. Sorry. In this moment of delay, Yin Liwei's icicle talisman and the twin blue bear's fireball talismans all hit within a foot of Xiaohua. Xiaohua didn't have time to think carefully and grab Kai Zhuoxia's wrist. A huge force was transmitted, and Kai Zhuoxia's figure immediately floated up like a cloud behind Xiaohua, flying far away. You think you can leave? Behind them, Yin Liwei saw that the icicle talisman had missed, and he also mobilized his true qi and aroused his flight talisman to chase after them. Although Xiaohua's flying speed was extremely fast, he didn't know what was going on, But although Kaizhuoxia was also using all of her magic force and using her fastest speed to chase after him, there was a resistance blocking Xiao Hua's arm, restricting his flying speed. As a result, Xiao Hua's flying speed was only around the 9th level of qi refinement, unable to increase. Ha ha ha, Yin Liwei sneered. Under the urging of the flight talisman, his speed was already comparable to the 9th level of qi refinement. The distance that Xiao Hua had suddenly pulled apart a moment ago was unceasingly shrinking. Looking at the twin blue bears again. Although their cultivation was at the 6th level of qi refinement, at this moment, they were still insufficient. They spared no effort to fly behind the three people, and the distance between them grew larger and larger. What's going on? Xiao Hua stared blankly, and then became very anxious. He had killed a 6th-level qi refinement cultivator before, but he had never fought a 7th-level qi refinement cultivator before. Although he saw that Yin Liwei's magic force was formidable, he had some confidence in protecting himself, but with Kaizhuoxia, he was definitely not a match. No wonder. There's a flight dual talisman. At this moment, Xiao Hua was very regretful that he didn't buy a flight dual talisman. Little thief, hand over your life. Yin Liwei chased a bit closer, and a yellow talisman shot out. A flying sword condensed and directly stabbed towards Xiao Hua's back. Fellow Taoist Xiao, let go of I. Kaizhuoxia was very anxious and exerted all of her strength to pull her arm back. Just as Kaizhuoxia struggled free of her arm, Xiao Hua's mind lit up, and he shouted, Fellow Taoist Kai, withdraw your magic force. Don't use your true qi in the slightest. Kaizhuoxia didn't understand, but at this moment, she obeyed Xiao Hua and immediately dispersed her magic force, no longer urging the flight talisman. A miracle appeared. Just as Kaizhuoxia's magic force dispersed, the force blocking Xiao Hua's arm suddenly disappeared. How heavy was Kaizhuoxia? In Xiao Hua's hand, she was about the same as a kitten. With just a slight pull of his hand, she was pulled to his side, and Xiao Hua's figure suddenly accelerated, like a shooting star. Not only did he dodge Yin Liwei's flying sword, he even flew far away, disappearing into the clouds in the blink of an eye. Yin Liwei saw that the situation was hopeless, and he also made a prompt decision, stopping his figure. His face was filled with inconceivable shock, and he looked at Xiao Hua's flying little black from afar, not knowing what he was thinking. Soon, the twin bear's pylon also caught up. Looking at the void in midair, the two of them looked at each other and whispered, Fellow Taoist Yin, this guy's flying speed has become a lot faster compared to that day when we met. What's the origin of this guy? Yin Liwei waved his hand, stopping the two of them from continuing to speak. We've asked around, but no one knows this guy's name. If it weren't for fellow Taoist Yan's message, the two of us wouldn't have known that this guy is called Xiao Hua. The twin bears' pylon shook their heads. I heard Kaizhuoxia say that this Xiao Hua is a loose cultivator, but his cultivation is only at the 3rd layer of qi refining, but his flying speed is comparable to the 10th layer of qi refining. How could he be a loose cultivator? That's right, fellow Taoist Yin. When the two of us met last year, Xiao Hua was only at the 1st layer of qi refining. And, in a year, advancing from the 1st layer of qi refining to the 3rd layer of qi refining isn't rare, so it doesn't count as anything. If he's a loose cultivator, then there's a problem. Yin Liwei pinched his chin and sneered. After returning from the sobbing Ming Mountains, put in more effort. Since you know this guy's name, you must drag him out. You must know, if he can escape from our hands today, he can kill us tomorrow. If we don't take advantage of his shallow cultivation to strike first and gain the upper hand, I'm afraid there won't be a good ending in the future. Yes, I understand. Pylon and the twin bears bowed and saluted. Soon after, they said embarrassedly, the two of us aren't talented, so we don't know how we exposed ourselves, causing fellow Taoist Yin to be unable to do as you wish. Hee, it has nothing to do with you. The two of them were extremely cautious and changed directions twice. I'm afraid that when I went out to send a message, I gave myself away. Yin Liwei smiled and waved his hand. However, even so, they still left behind a flaw? Fellow Taoist Yin, please speak. Pylon and the twin bears were stunned and asked, The sobbing Ming Mountains are extremely vast, so how could they find an extremely hidden place in such a hurry? In order to not arouse Ai's suspicion, Kai Zhuoxia presumably followed her previous plan and led Ai to the real place, then pretended that she couldn't find the place and coaxed Ai to leave. Only in the real place would I feel normal. So, as long as we carefully search the place just now, we'll definitely find some clues. Pailon and the twin bears felt that it was inconceivable, but after thinking about it carefully, it really was very possible. Even if it's not, what's the harm in us looking around again? Yin Liwei smiled and returned to the stone wall first. Sure enough, at the foot of a mountain in the distance, Kai Zhuoxia had already changed into a Taoist robe. The blush on her face hadn't faded, and she said in a low voice, I also had no choice. If it wasn't the real place, how could we deceive Yin Liwei? I only hoped that he wanted to take the mother-child spirit fruit for himself and let us go when he didn't find a single one. Who would have thought? No matter. Xiao Hua smiled and said, Isn't it better for us to keep our lives than anything else? But the Kai family of Lu Yang is far inferior to the Yin family. I'm afraid that this offense will put my Kai family in a difficult situation. Kai Zhuoxia smiled bitterly. Humph, if we're afraid of this, how can we still cultivate? Xiao Hua sneered and muttered in his heart. Why don't you take out the name of Li Zongbao and the name of the Utmost Happiness faction? I'm sure even the Xuanyin school wouldn't dare to say this. Why should we be afraid of the small Yin family? Also, the place where the mother-child spirit fruit grows, the restrictive spell doesn't seem to be very powerful. Although the place is hidden, if they can guess, I'm afraid the mother-child spirit fruit won't be safe. Kai Zhuoxia said again. Xiao Hua was a little angry. Since he knew that Yin Liwei had bad intentions, why did he still go to the place where the mother-child spirit fruit grows? He could have just found another place. However, when he thought about Kai Zhuoxia's misgivings about not wanting to provoke the Yin family, Xiao Hua felt a sense of powerlessness. Suddenly, Xiao Hua's eyes lit up, and a fierce look flashed across his eyes. Although the fierce look disappeared in a flash, it was seen clearly by Kai Zhuoxia. A chill rose from the bottom of Kai Zhuoxia's heart. Fellow Kai, please wait for a moment. I'll go back and take a look. If they leave, I'll come back to greet you. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Yes, I'll listen to fellow Zhao's arrangements. Kai Zhuoxia's heart trembled. She didn't dare to ask Xiao Hua's true meaning and hurriedly agreed. Then, she said in a low voice, Fellow Xiao, be careful. Don't worry, fellow Kai. I'll only watch from afar. When they leave, I'll turn back. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and flew towards the stone wall again. Looking at Xiao Hua's figure gradually flying away, Kai Zhuoxia stared for a long time. She really didn't expect that a cultivator at the first level of qi refining would have such a great change in his cultivation in a mere year's time. A cultivator at the third level of qi refining actually dared to go back and face a cultivator at the 7th level of qi refining and 2 cultivators at the 5th level of qi refining. -5. Chapter 1403. Yin Liwei and the Pailon twin bears flew to the stone wall. They first looked around for a long time, then their gazes fell on the stone stream that flowed out of the stream. They saw that the stone stream was very thin. The stream flowed from top to bottom, filling the gaps between the stones and gurgling unceasingly. Here, Yin Liwei laughed heartily. The water in this stone stream is too deliberate. Presumably, some cultivator used magic power to move the stones here to block the passage. Of course, no wonder there weren't any spiritual power fluctuations. The Pailon twin bears echoed. Let I see what's going on. As Yin Liwei spoke, he slapped his hand and took out a palm-sized object from his storage bag. This object was oval in shape, and there was a thumb-sized hole in the middle. Yin Liwei took that object and took out a yellow talisman in his other hand. Under the urging of magic power, the yellow talisman flashed with an orange brilliance. Soon after, Yin Liwei stuck the yellow talisman onto the palm-sized object. The yellow talisman's brilliance sank into the object. Soon after, the hole in the middle of the object flashed with a milky white brilliance, and then it disappeared. Then, Yin Liwei held the object in front of his eyes. A strange thing happened. Through the hole, Yin Liwei could actually clearly see what was behind the stone wall. Oh, this is a big stone. Look, here is the original gap. Someone used magic power to seal it. It looks like a complete stone wall. Yin Liwei squinted one eye, looking as he spoke. At this time, there was suddenly a slight ringing sound. Huh? The pylon twin bears jumped in fright. Looking up, they saw a small bell tied to Yin Liwei's waist. Ah, there's an enemy? Yin Liwei was also shocked. He absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua to suddenly turn around. Moreover, he was already within 10 feet of him. But where was the enemy? Yin Liwei was vigilant and hurriedly added several defensive yellow talismans to his body. Which fellow Taoist is here? I am Su Yan's Yin clan disciple. Fellow Taoist, please show yourself. Yin Liwei said loudly. But after a long time, no one appeared, and the small bell on Yin Liwei's waist was still ringing. Underground, Pylon and the twin bears were shocked. They suddenly realized something and looked down. Yin Yinwei also came to his senses. Holding the yellow talisman in his hand, he raised the object with the hole in front of his eyes and looked down. Through the hole, everything about 3 feet underground was presented before his eyes. Under Yin Ganwei's careful inspection, he found that about 3 feet below his feet, a ball of yellow light was covering a human figure. Just as Yin Ganwei lowered his head to check, the human figure in the brilliance seemed to have sensed Yin Ganwei's detection. It suddenly stood up and rushed towards another direction on the ground. Earth Escape Talisman? Yin Liwei sneered. You want to run? No way. As he spoke, he raised his hand. Under the urging of magic power, various yellow talismans rained down. As long as the human figure rushed out from the ground, it was bound to be hit by the yellow talismans. Yin Liwei's mouth revealed a trace of a sinister smile, as if he could already see the miserable state of this person being hit by the yellow talismans. Who knew? That person seemed to have a divine sense. He was actually able to perceive Yin Liwei's yellow talismans. Just as he rushed out from the ground, he suddenly rushed towards Yin Liwei's feet. That speed was faster than an arrow. In the blink of an eye, he rushed to Yin Liwei's feet. Courting death, Yin Liwei was furious. He slapped his hand and was just about to take out the yellow talismans from his storage bag. At this time, the human figure rushed out from the ground. The thin figure was holding a pitch-black spear in his hand. Xiao Hua. The 2 Pi blue bears weren't far away, so they naturally saw clearly. They scratched their heads, but they didn't expect that Xiao Hua would actually dare to come back. Moreover, he was even hiding under their feet. Humph! Yin Liwei shook his hand, and his magic power was about to urge the yellow talismans. It was also at this time that Xiao Hua's spear pierced the crook of Yin Liwei's leg. A tremendous force transmitted. Without waiting for Yin Liwei to scream, a burst of brilliance flashed. Yin Liwei's defensive yellow talismans had already been pierced through by Xiao Hua's devil spear. Audacious! Yin Liwei was worthy of being a 7th-level Qi condensation cultivator. His defensive yellow talismans were broken, and the black Qi of the devil spear pierced through. However, his magic power still urged the yellow talismans in his hand. Several icicle talismans followed Yin Liwei's hand and stabbed down. Bang, bang, bang. Several consecutive sounds rang out. The iron cloak talismans on Xiao Hua's body were quickly broken, and the remaining icicles pierced his shoulder with extreme ease. Xiao Hua was greatly shocked. He didn't even have time to look at Yin Liwei's injury. His figure didn't even change. Maintaining his previous posture, he retreated at extreme speed. Xiao Hua's speed was extremely fast. In an instant, he retreated 10 meters away. You. Yin Liwei pointed at Xiao Hua in astonishment. His hand didn't stop, and he took out some medicinal pills from his storage pouch and placed them in his mouth. Unfortunately, before the medicinal pills in his mouth could melt, a black qi pervaded his face. Yin Liwei's finger that was pointing at Xiao Hua also gradually stiffened. His figure fell to the ground with a bang, and he no longer made a sound. Upon seeing this, the twin Pi blue bears felt as if they were dreaming. This was a 7th-level Qi condensation cultivator. His cultivation was far stronger than theirs. Now, He was actually killed by a third-level Qi condensation cultivator. Although it was a sneak attack, and there was no lack of trickery involved, Yin Liwei died at Xiao Hua's hands after all. Run! This thought emerged in the minds of the twin Pi Blue Bears at the same time. What was laughable was that, as fifth-level Qi condensation cultivators, the twin Pi Blue Bears had encountered Xiao Hua twice. Both times, they had ended their confrontation with Xiao Hua by running away. The first time, the twin Pi Blue Bears had escaped, but what about this time? The twin Pi Blue Bears had long since reached a tacit understanding in their hearts. One of them fled into the Sobbing Ming Mountain Range, and the other fled out of the Sobbing Ming Mountain Range. As for the injured Xiao Hua, he didn't care about his injuries at this time. He stood up and directly chased after the twin Pi Blue Bears who were fleeing out of the Sobbing Ming Mountain Range. The hearts of the twin Pi Blue Bears who were fleeing out of the mountain range trembled with fear. They threw out their yellow talismans with all their might, only wanting to prevent Xiao Hua from getting close to them. They wanted to prevent Xiao Hua from using force to break through their magic. Who would have thought that when Xiao Hua saw the yellow talismans flying over, the corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. He similarly waved his hand, and several fireball talismans were activated by his transcendence energy. Like hailstones, they pelted down on the twin Pi Blue Bears and sealed off their surroundings. Rumble, 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 rumble. Xiao Hua wasn't stingy with the yellow talismans in his hand, and he threw out several handfuls in succession. Ah, a blood-curdling scream was heard from the explosion of the fireball. Soon after, a charred corpse fell from midair, falling straight to the ground. One of the twin Pi Blue Bears, a fifth-level Qi refining cultivator, was actually burned to death by the fireball talismans that Xiao Hua refined himself. Seeing the twin Pi Blue Bears' corpses fall, Xiao Hua still didn't dare to be at ease. He lowered his body and flew past the twin Pi Blue Bears' corpses. The tip of the devil's spear in his hand still pierced the corpses' backs. Only then did he fly far away, chasing after the twin Pi Blue Bears who were flying into the Sobbing Ming Mountain Range. The twin Pi Blue Bears were fifth-level Qi refining cultivators, which was the middle level of the Qi refining realm. Compared to Xiao Hua, who was a low-level cultivator at the middle level of the third level, their cultivation was much higher. Although Xiao Hua's cultivation progress was very slow, the transcendence energy in his body far surpassed those of the same level. He wasn't much different from the twin Pi Blue Bears who were in the middle level of the Qi refining realm. If the twin Pi Blue Bears worked together, they might have had a chance. At the very least, they wouldn't have been defeated like this. However, the twin Pi Blue Bears had long suspected that Xiao Hua was concealing his cultivation level and planted a seed of fear in their hearts. Secondly, when they saw the 7th-level Qi refining cultivator, Yinwei, was actually killed by Xiao Hua, how could they dare to block his attack? The first thought in their minds was run. After Xiao Hua killed one of the twin Pi Blue Bears, he immediately flew high again, chasing after them in the direction of the Sobbing Ming Mountain Range. While Xiao Hua was burning the other one, the other twin Pi Blue Bears was already about to escape into an emerald green thicket. If he fell, this Sobbing Ming Mountain Range was so big and Xiao Hua didn't have a divine sense, he would probably escape. Xiao Hua clenched his teeth and urged his transcendence energy. He completely ignored the several wounds on his shoulder that were caused by the icicle talisman and chased after them with extreme speed. However, the distance between Xiao Hua and the twin Pi Blue Bears was still a bit far. He was still a bit slow. Just when he was still several tens of feet away from the twin Pi Blue Bears, the twin Pi Blue Bears turned their heads and saw Xiao Hua chasing after them. They no longer flew forward and plunged into the thicket in the mountain range. When Xiao Hua flew to the same place where they fell, there was only a thick layer of fallen leaves, decaying and damp. Where was the shadow of the twin Pi Blue Bears? Xiao Hua was unwilling to give up. He sat cross-legged and silently circulated the nameless mnemonic chant, wanting to use that inexplicable perception. However, the movements of several tens of feet around him were all reflected in his heart in a hazy manner, but they were all very normal. How could he find any trace of the twin Pi Blue Bears? After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Xiao Hua stood up. He secretly sighed and flew up from his original position. He actually didn't care about the twin Pi Blue Bears. Currently, It wasn't difficult for him to kill this kind of trash. What he was worried about was that the twin pie blue bears would send the news of him killing Yin Wei to the Yin clan, or even Xuanyin school. Regardless of whether it was Xuanyin school or the Yin clan, Xiaohua didn't want to provoke them. Forget it. How could a cultivator be afraid of these grudges? Since I can't kill them, then I'll just let nature take its course. Xiaohua directly flew out of the Weiming mountain range. However, just as he flew out several tens of feet, he suddenly heard a bird's cry behind him. Although this sound wasn't as breathtaking as the bird's cry he heard on the southern plains that day, it still caused his magic power to slightly stagnate and his body to stop for a moment. When Xiaohua turned his head in shock, he saw a goshawk spreading its wings and flying out from the lush greenery of the Weiming mountain range. And in front of the goshawk were precisely the twin pie blue bears. Huh, how did this ruffian provoke the goshawk? Xiaohua was greatly surprised. However, he was also delighted in his heart. He prepared to intercept the twin pie blue bears. Those twin pie blue bears were also strange. They rushed out from the forest and didn't evade when they saw Xiaohua. Instead, they directly rushed over. Strange, could it be? Xiaohua secretly cried out in surprise. He had a bad feeling in his heart. -5. Chapter 1404. Seeing that one of the pylon bears didn't escape to other places, but instead chose to fly in his direction, Xiaohua felt that something was wrong. However, before he could turn around and fly away, a bloody scene occurred. That goshawk's figure was rather large. Its two wings were about 3 meters wide. Although the pylon bears were flying fast, that goshawk was actually much faster than them. With a flap of its wings, it flew to the top of the pylon bears' heads. It was very strange. When the goshawk stretched out its sharp claws that flashed with cold light and grabbed downwards, it didn't grab at the heads that were closest to the goshawk's claws, but instead directly grabbed at the backs of the pylon bears. The pylon bears' faces had long lost color. Feeling the swift and fierce wind on their backs, they immediately changed direction and accelerated their flight. The goshawk's claws missed. It opened its beak and screeched angrily again. Following this screech, the pylon bears' bodies slightly stagnated. In the blink of an eye, that goshawk's two sharp claws grabbed at the same time. The defensive yellow talismans on the pylon bears' bodies were like paper. Without even flashing brilliance, they were immediately torn apart. Immediately after, the goshawk's sharp claws deeply pierced into the backs of the pylon bears. With a miserable cry, the pylon bears' bodies were actually torn in half by the goshawk. The internal organs and some flesh of the pylon bears immediately scattered in midair. However, immediately after, they were blown by the strong mountain wind and scattered in all directions. However, something strange happened. Just as the pylon bears were torn apart by the goshawk, an earthy yellow shadow flew out from the backs of the pylon bears and directly landed on a tree on the ground. The goshawk also immediately threw away the remains of the pylon bears in its claws. With a flap of its wings, it chased after that earthy yellow shadow. That shadow was very small, almost invisible from far away. If not for Xiaohua's sharp eyes and ears, he probably wouldn't have seen it. It was also because of this that Xiaohua was scared out of his wits, because that earthy yellow shadow was very obvious on the emerald green ground. Its speed was also very fast. In the blink of an eye, it had dashed several meters. That direction was precisely where Xiaohua was standing. Xiaohua didn't hesitate to change direction and desperately fled out of the sobbing Ming mountain range. At this time, Xiaohua already couldn't care about concealing himself, couldn't care about elegance, only wanted to escape from this sobbing Ming mountains, only wanted to escape from this incomparably powerful goshawk's sharp claws. Unfortunately, even if Xiaohua's current flying speed is comparable to that of a peak qi refining cultivator, the two spirit beasts behind him are also extraordinary. The earthy yellow shadow in the front has the appearance of a small mouse. The most ridiculous thing is that on the back of that small mouse, there is an even smaller mouse cub. That mouse cub's eyes haven't even opened, and its body doesn't have many fine hairs. Only a small tail is entangled with the mouse's tail. Although this mouse was still dragging its baby, Its speed was still much faster than Xiaohua's. It was like a flying yellow line rapidly extending across the emerald green canopy. That goshawk is even more powerful. With a few flaps of its wings, it caught up with the mouse. Its sharp claws are everywhere on the mouse's back. The mouse's fleeing speed isn't fast enough, but it dodges extremely fast. Every time it is caught by the sharp claws, it will be dodged, and countless trees under the mouse's body will be torn apart by the goshawk's sharp claws. Xiaohua desperately fled in front, but in just a few breaths of time, that mouse and goshawk caught up with him. Two ice-cold divine senses swept over Xiaohua's body, causing Xiaohua's heart to die like ashes. Is there a mistake? Both of them have the strength of a foundation establishment cultivator. Xiaohua secretly criticized, "You guys fight. There's no need to bring disaster to mortals." Thinking this, Xiaohua clenched his teeth, turned around, and immediately flew in another direction. Moreover, he flew higher and higher. He knew that this goshawk was chasing after the mouse. As long as the mouse doesn't catch up to him, he will have a chance to survive. Things don't go as he wishes. Xiaohua had just flown away when that mouse that had been fleeing on the treetop suddenly flew into the air. Like a perfectly straight yellow line, it shot towards Xiaohua's back. Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. With a wave of his hand, a stack of yellow talismans was thrown towards the mouse as if they were free of charge. With a rumbling sound, a dozen or so fireballs exploded behind him. But in the midst of the exploding fireballs, that mouse unexpectedly flew onto Xiaohua's back unscathed. How could Xiaohua dare to let it get on his back? The tip of the devil's spear in his hand thrust forward. That mouse only slightly turned and dodged the tip of the spear, steadily landing on Xiaohua's back. By the time the mouse grasped the Taoist robe on Xiaohua's back, that mouse's expression was dispirited, as if its vitality had been greatly damaged. It wanted to rely on Xiaohua to throw off the goshawk on its back. Xiaohua hurriedly grabbed with his backhand, but even though the mouse's eyes were slightly narrowed, its divine sense was still there. No matter how Xiaohua stretched out his hand, he simply couldn't grab even half a strand of mouse hair. Why am I so unlucky? Without waiting for Xiaohua to complain in exasperation, a black shadow descended from the sky. A 3-zhang wide wing blocked Xiaohua's head, and in the fierce sound of the wind, the goshawk's sharp claws grabbed at the mouse on Xiaohua's back. Xiaohua's heart was greatly shaken. Needless to say, this mouse would definitely be able to dodge this claw, and the goshawk's claws would most likely land on his body. Therefore, he was no longer able to throw off the mouse. He once again clenched his teeth, and the true qi in his entire body rapidly revolved. Urging his magic power, he quickly flew in another direction with incomparable speed. At this time, there was already no other thought in his mind. He only wanted to fly even faster, to escape the goshawk's sharp claws. However, he had only flown for a few breaths of time before another sharp gust of wind attacked his back from above. That goshawk's sharp claws fell again. Xiaohua sighed in his heart. He fiercely took out the tip of the devil's spear from his space, and with a turn of his hand, he wanted to stab it into the goshawk's claw. With a clang, it seemed like two sharp objects had collided. Some sparks burst out from between the tip of the spear and the goshawk's claw, but there wasn't any damage on the goshawk's claw. Good heavens! Is this still a goshawk's claw? I'm afraid that even metal and stone aren't this sturdy. Xiaohua's heart trembled again. However, the strength of Xiaohua's stab was extremely great. Although the goshawk's wind was also strong, it was still struck back a few steps. Its two huge wings fiercely flapped, and it stabilized itself. A resounding eagle cry rang out. That goshawk was infuriated by Xiaohua's counterattack. Going berserk, its wings flapped, and its two eagle claws rapidly clawed at two places on Xiaohua's back. Xiaohua saw that the tip of the devil's spear was able to block the goshawk's sharp claws. His heart was a bit shaken, and at the same time, he lowered his head and flew rapidly. At the same time, he circulated the nameless chant, and all his attention was focused on the movements behind him. Seeing the goshawk's claw coming down, he immediately blocked the tip of the devil's spear behind him just like before. With another clang, Xiaohua blocked one of the goshawk's claws, but in the instant he blocked it, the other goshawk's claw came from another direction. This claw was like lightning. The iron cloak talisman and weak water talisman on Xiaohua's body were like paper under this sharp claw. In an instant, it pierced into his Taoist robe. At this crucial moment, the muscles on Xiaohua's body suddenly trembled. His entire body suddenly hugged into a ball, and Xiaohua seemed to be on flat ground. With an extremely ingenious movement technique, he actually dodged the goshawk's sharp claws. The pleasant surprise didn't stop there. At the same time that Xiaohua used his movement technique, his other hand very naturally took out the devil's spear from the space. He slightly unfolded it in the air, and like using an iron rod, he swatted it at the goshawk's sharp claws from an extremely strange angle. The goshawk's sharp claws did its best to dodge, but under Xiaohua's ingenious angle and excellent timing, it still couldn't dodge and was hit by the devil's spear. Caw, caw, caw. The goshawk's sharp claws fiercely retracted. It raised its beak to the sky and cried out several times. Immediately, its 3-meter-long wings fiercely flapped, and a hurricane-like force directly attacked Xiaohua. That hurricane hadn't yet come close, but a suffocating feeling hit Xiaohua in the face. Xiaohua turned pale with fright. This wasn't a simple force, but a hurricane formed from spiritual aura. This was the furious attack of a Foundation establishment goshawk. How could a trifling aura-refining cultivator like him withstand it? Not daring to hesitate, Xiaohua immediately changed direction. Head down, he flew straight to the ground. Moreover, at the same time he flew down, Xiaohua immediately used an earth escape talisman on his body. This was also the flash of inspiration he had just now. Sure enough, the goshawk was caught off guard by Xiaohua's sudden descent. In an instant, it rushed far away. By the time the goshawk landed again, Xiaohua had already fallen a lot. Caw, the goshawk had been teased time and time again. This time, it was thoroughly angry. With a flap of its giant wings, a black shadow of 10 feet in size swooped down from the sky towards Xiaohua's back. Its sharp claws actually emitted a cold light under the sunlight. If Xiaohua was caught by these claws, he would most likely end up with his flesh and blood flying everywhere. Quick, quick, quick. Xiaohua almost wanted to reach out a hand in his heart, wanting to quickly land on the ground. Unfortunately, the goshawk's sharp claws attacked when he was about 100 feet above the ground. Xiaohua didn't even think. His entire body flew at an extremely beautiful angle in midair. The devil's spear in his hand was similarly incomparably gorgeous, and in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, it blocked between his back and the goshawk's claws. The strange thing was that this devil's spear wasn't the same as before. In this attack, there wasn't any strength. Instead, at the same time it collided with the goshawk's claws, it used a kind of ingenious method to borrow the enormous force of the goshawk's claws to rapidly push Xiaohua's own body towards the ground. Xiaohua only needed a breath to cover the distance of 100 feet. Just as his body landed on the ground, a burst of brilliance flashed on Xiaohua's body. The Earth Escape Talisman came into effect. Xiaohua's body suddenly disappeared under the ground. Caw, the goshawk saw that it had been teased time and time again. Its prey, an extremely weak thing, had actually disappeared in front of its eyes. It was abnormally furious. Its body flew on the ground, and its divine sense ruthlessly swept over Xiaohua's body, who was deep underground. Xiaohua was underground and had already sensed the goshawk's divine sense. Greatly alarmed, he hurriedly fled to other places. Unfortunately, when he fled 100 feet, the goshawk also flew 100 feet. The goshawk's body had always been above Xiaohua's head. -5. Chapter 1405. Xiaohua's Earth Escape Talisman had a time limit. Not long after, he saw his body flashing with light. Xiaohua hurriedly put another Earth Escape Talisman on his body and fled to another place. After so many times, the Earth Escape Talismans in Xiaohua's space had been exhausted. Xiaohua looked at the pitch-black sky in panic, not knowing what to do. Although he couldn't see the goshawk on the ground, the goshawk's divine sense had never left his side. He had already fled for a long time, but the divine sense was like a maggot in his bones. He couldn't escape. What should I do? Xiao Hua waved his hand and took out the last Earth Escape talisman. After using this Earth Escape talisman, he could only be obediently squeezed out of the ground, exposing himself to the goshawk's sharp claws and huge wings. Facing a Foundation Establishment goshawk, Xiao Hua was like a defenseless baby. At this moment, a squeaking sound was heard. The rat that had been lying on his back all this time flew up and floated in front of him out of thin air. "Io, I forgot to escape. This mouse is the real prey that the goshawk is chasing. I'm just a fish in the pond." Xiao Hua saw the mouse and suddenly realized. At this moment, the mouse seemed to have recovered a bit of its vitality. Its eyes were wide open, and it stared at Xiao Hua from top to bottom. "AI, big brother," Xiao Hua said, "I don't know where you came from, but you should escape. Why are you pulling me? Even if I cultivate for 10 years, I'm afraid I won't be a match for that goshawk. If big brother has good intentions, you should leave quickly. While I can still hide for a while, let me live." Saying this, Xiao Hua put his hands together and saluted the mouse. Mouse also didn't know if he could understand, but after a moment, he also held his 2 mouse paws in front of his chest and couldn't help but smile as he saluted Xiao Hua. Seeing this, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and muttered, "Big brother, don't laugh at this little Taoist. You leaving quickly is already a grace to this little Taoist." While speaking, the light around Xiao Hua's body flickered. Xiao Hua knew that the Earth Escape talisman was about to lose its effect, so he quickly used the last Earth Escape talisman on himself. Right at this moment, the rat's tail moved slightly, and it actually brought the little rat on its back that hadn't opened its eyes to his eyes. The amazing thing was that the little rat actually floated in midair and didn't seem to fall. The rat stared at the rat cub in front of it for a long time. There was an indescribable meaning in its tiny eyes. Xiao Hua did not understand it at first, but when his gaze met the rat's, he felt as if his heart had been struck by a giant hammer. In the rat's eyes, there was a kind of pity, a kind of reluctance, a kind of determination, and an unparalleled love. Xiao Hua watched in disbelief. He didn't dare to believe that he was actually able to see such a scene through his narrow vision. His eyes had long since become moist. At this moment, he also understood the rat's intentions. He just stood there quietly, waiting for the rat's decision. Sure enough, in just a moment, the rat suddenly retracted its gaze. An ice-cold divine sense swept over Xiao Hua's body. The rat's mouth was still making GGGG sounds, saying a language that Xiao Hua didn't understand. Xiao Hua's face was heavy. He also looked straight at it, seemingly not retreating. Soon after, the rat shook its tail, separating it from the rat cub's tail. Then, with a tap of its tail, the rat cub floated towards Xiao Hua. However, just as it floated a few inches, the rat's tail curled up and suddenly pulled the rat cub back. The rat's tail coiled around the rat cub, and a doting feeling filled the entire space. Sigh, Xiao Hua sighed inwardly. He also couldn't bear it in his heart. Soon after, the rat pushed the rat cub. Without waiting for the rat cub to float in front of Xiao Hua, the rat's figure flashed, and it actually easily escaped from the halo of Xiao Hua's Earth Escape talisman. And just as the rat left the ground and disappeared from Xiao Hua's sight, Xiao Hua clearly saw that the rat suddenly turned its head, and its eyes lovingly looked at the rat cub in midair. Xiao Hua didn't know the situation above the ground. He only knew that just as the rat left the ground, the goshawk's ice-cold divine sense immediately disappeared from his body. When the divine sense disappeared, the rat cub floated in front of Xiao Hua's eyes. This was an extremely cute little thing. Its eyes hadn't opened yet, and its red body was covered in fine fur. Its small tail unconsciously moved, as if it was looking for its mother's warmth. Sigh, Xiao Hua. How could he bear to ignore this rat cub? He gently extended his hands to hold it. The weightless rat cub was slightly warm as it leaned against Xiao Hua's palm. Its small tail had just touched Xiao Hua's finger when it instinctively curled up, tightly curling around Xiao Hua's little finger. A kind of indescribable warmth flowed in Xiao Hua's heart. Immediately after, Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly escaped underground and quickly fled in a direction. When the Earth Escape Talisman was about to lose its effect, he rushed out of the ground. Sure enough, on the ground, there were no traces of the goshawk and rat. When Xiaohua saw this, he knew that he had escaped with his life. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. He looked at the pink lump of meat in his palm, and the corner of his mouth curled up. His palm slightly curled up, and he was about to put it into his spirit storage pouch. However, the rat cub's small tail was tightly wrapped around Xiaohua's little finger, and it didn't loosen. Xiaohua was unable to put it in. What should I do? I can't always hold it in my hand, right? Xiaohua was somewhat depressed. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he thought of the ice worm king's egg and water-patterned butterfly's egg in the space. He brushed his hand and tried to send the rat cub into the space. Strangely enough, the rat cub's body actually smoothly entered the space, but its small tail was still wrapped around Xiaohua's finger. However, when the light from reverse light shone on the rat cub's body, the rat cub immediately floated comfortably in the space, and its small tail also loosened from Xiaohua's finger. Hee, this place is safe. I'll let this little guy slowly grow up. In any case, I won't let down the rat mother who generously went to her death. Xiaohua laughed and raised his eyes to discern the direction. He urged his magic power, and his entire figure didn't fly high. Following the treetops, he flew out of the sobbing Ming mountain range at extreme speed. At the foot of the mountain, Kaixuoxia had long been running in circles. However, she didn't dare to fly back to the sobbing Ming mountain range. When she saw Xiaohua's figure flying over, her eyes held an indescribable astonishment and peace of mind. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Kaixuoxia couldn't wait to welcome him and impatiently asked, Pylon, the twin bears, and Yin Shenwei, how are they? Xiaohua's eyes slightly narrowed, and he landed on the foot of the mountain. He laughed. What does fellow Taoist Kai think? Kaixuoxia's face revealed joy, and she laughed. Fellow Taoist Xiao can return. Then they, not waiting for Kaixuoxia to finish speaking, Xiaohua waved his hand and said, How can I be a match for the three seniors? I only watched the three of them fight from afar. As for what happened to them, I also didn't dare to show my face. I only shot them a glance and then hurriedly fled. If they perished together, that's also possible. Kaixuoxia's eyes turned, and she hurriedly nodded and said, That's right. I also had the same thought. Moreover, just now, the sobbing Ming mountain range let out a great cry of the firmament shaking. Maybe it's also normal for them to be killed by the firmament shaking. Firmament shaking? Xiaohua's brows furrowed, and he inwardly said, In all likelihood, that goshawk is the firmament shaking. Just by hearing this name, I can tell it's not a master that's easy to worry about. Thus he laughed. Isn't that right, fellow Taoist Kai? What rank is this firmament shaking? When I heard that hawk cry, I trembled with fear. I couldn't even fly. The firmament shaking is a third-rank spirit beast, and its strength is comparable to a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator like me. Not to mention us, even a 7th-stage qi condensation cultivator like Yin Shenwei wouldn't be lucky enough to encounter it. Kaixuoxia chuckled. However, since the firmament shaking has appeared here, fellow Taoist Xiao can forget about the spirit-seeking mouse. Why is that? Xiaohua asked. Spirit-seeking mice are different from ordinary spirit beasts. They have strength ranging from the initial to the 3rd rank, and even the 4th rank. The initial rank is naturally equivalent to a first-level qi refining cultivator, and the 4th rank is equivalent to a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. I was still thinking that if fellow Taoist Zhao's luck is good, you can encounter a low-rank spirit-seeking mouse. Moreover, fellow Taoist Zhao's flying speed is very fast, so your chances of catching a low-rank spirit-seeking mouse are also much higher. Kaixuoxia pursed her lips and said regretfully, Unfortunately, the firmament shaking is the natural enemy of spirit-seeking mice. No matter what rank the spirit-seeking mouse is, when it sees the firmament shaking, all of its bones and tendons will go limp, and it won't be able to escape even half a step. Today, the firmament shaking has appeared, and I'm afraid we won't be able to see any more spirit-seeking mice in the surroundings. No matter. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, our goal isn't the spirit-seeking mouse. As long as we can find the mother-child spirit fruit, it's fine. Of course. Kaizhuoxia clapped her hands and said, then, let's go now? How could Xiaohua go now? He shook his head and said, the firmament shaking has just appeared, and the Sabman mountain range is still very dangerous. Let's wait a few more days. I's a bit impatient. Kaizhuoxia echoed. Soon after, Xiaohua and Xiaohua each found a place to rest in the mountains. After 3 days, they quietly arrived at the stone wall where the mother-child spirit fruit was located. The corpses of Yin Liwei and the Blue Bear duo had long since disappeared. Only their blood-stained Taoist robes and the storage pouches were left behind. Presumably, the corpses had already been eaten by the wild beasts in the mountains. Seeing that Xiaohua was extremely familiar with the location of the 3 corpses, Kaizhuoxia wasn't surprised in the slightest. During these 3 days, she also understood that the higher Xiaohua's cultivation was, the more beneficial it was to her. Therefore, when Xiaohua held the 3 storage pouches in his hand, Kaizhuoxia didn't wait for him to speak and said with a smile, fellow Taoist Zhao's luck is indeed good. This storage pouch should be a gift from the heavens to fellow Taoist. How come I didn't see it? It seems like I really have no fate with the things inside the storage pouch. Xiaohua stared blankly for a moment, then immediately understood. He no longer held back and hung the 3 storage pouches on his waist. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please follow I. Kaizhuoxia waited for Xiaohua to finish packing, then led Xiaohua to the place where the stream of water flowed on the stone wall. She used her hand to point at the stream and said, this is the passage that leads to the place where the mother-child spirit fruit grows. We only need to use magic power to break the stone walls on both sides of the stream, and we'll be able to see it. -5. Chapter 1406. Xiaohua had long known about the mystery of the stone wall. Since Kaizhuoxia didn't covet the storage bags of Yin Yinwei and the Blue Bears, Xiaohua absolutely wouldn't take advantage of Kaizhuoxia. So he smiled and said, it's all thanks to fellow Kai's guidance. If it was me, I wouldn't have been able to see that the water flow on the stone wall was actually the entrance. Kaizhuoxia pursed her lips and smiled. She walked in front of the water flow, looked left and right, then patted her storage bag and took out several strange yellow talismans. She activated her magic power, turning them into various colors of brilliance. With the wave of Kaizhuoxia's slender hands, they hit various parts of the stone wall. Formation talismans? Xiaohua's eyes narrowed. He saw Yin Yinwei use this thing before, and Kaizhuoxia also didn't explain much. Now that he saw Kaizhuoxia take it out, she must have prepared it during the half-year he was in seclusion. Soon after, Kaizhuoxia activated her magic power. Her hands formed simple seals and hit the formation talismans on the stone wall. Following the seals, the stone wall gradually overflowed with a faint brilliance. Xiaohua took a few glances and saw that the seals were very simple, so he lost interest. Soon after, he reached out and opened the storage bag at his waist, rummaging through the things inside. There were many things in Yin Yinwei's storage bag. There were some formation talismans, many yellow talismans, and several alchemy books. What made Xiaohua the most happy was that there were many marrow cleansing pills and clear pleasure pills, and even some Giji pills. These Giji pills were the same as the clear pleasure pills. There were also pills that could increase magic power. Xiaohua only learned about them after studying alchemy for this half-year, and they were also the pills he prepared to choose after taking the clear pleasure pill. Now that he saw them, of course he was wild with joy. Moreover, this Yin Yinwei was indeed the direct bloodline of Xuanyan School's alchemists. Not only were there many marrow cleansing pills, there were also many clear pleasure pills that exceeded Xiaohua's expectations. In contrast, there weren't many good things in the storage bags of the Blue Bears, only some ordinary pills. Not to mention any cultivation methods, even the yellow talismans were missing. This really made Xiaohua somewhat disdainful. What's wrong with these people? They don't even bring their own cultivation methods with them and still hide them. Is it so important? As she thought of this, she looked down on them and quietly put these things into her space so that no one would be able to find them. Fortunately, the quality of these 3 people's storage pouches was not bad. They could be exchanged for some high-grade spirit stones. Xiaohua put them in his sleeve and accepted them with a smile. While Xiaohua Qing was counting the medicinal pills, Kaizhuoxia was also nearing the end. Kaizhuoxia shouted, "Quick!" Her face flushed red. She formed a seal with both hands and raised it in front of her chest with great difficulty. Then, she slowly pushed it forward as if she was lifting a 1,000-kilogram boulder. After casting the seal with great difficulty, Kaizhuoxia's body trembled slightly. Sweat immediately seeped out of her face. This was the sign of overdraft of her supernatural power. Following Kaizhuoxia's final seal, a brilliant brilliance appeared on the stone wall. It was extremely dazzling. However, just as Xiaohua squinted his eyes and stared at it, that brilliance flashed and the stone wall returned to its original appearance. This? Xiaohua stared blankly, turning his head to look at Kaizhuoxia. The redness on Kaizhuoxia's face disappeared, revealing a pale white. Alas, Kaizhuoxia sighed and shook her head slightly. After a long while, she said in a low voice, My supernatural power is still insufficient. This stone wall, I'm afraid it can't be broken." Soon after, as if explaining, she said embarrassedly, "I found Yin Yanwei because he's a 7th-level qi refining cultivator. His supernatural power is much stronger than I, that's why." Xiaohua nodded and didn't say anything. Thinking for a moment, he walked to the front of the stone wall and looked at the place where Kaizhuoxia had just inserted the formation talisman. Then, he jumped into the stream of water on the stone wall, took a good stand, and placed his hand on the side of the stone wall. Taking a deep breath, he circulated all the strength in his body and moved the stone wall to the outside. Xiaohua's strength wasn't just for show. Following Xiaohua's exertion of strength, that stone wall's brilliance began to flash. Moreover, it became increasingly resplendent, almost exactly the same as when Kaizhuoxia used the formation talisman just a moment ago. Ah? Kaizhuoxia stood beside the stream of water, her face full of astonishment. She really didn't think that when a cultivator's strength reached a certain degree, they could actually break through magic with force. But the matter still wasn't as simple as Xiaohua thought. Just as the stone wall faintly swayed, his fingertips suddenly slipped. It seemed like the restriction on the stone wall had some effect. Xiaohua's figure immediately lost balance and fell into the stream of water. Kaizhuoxia was startled. Just as she raised her hand and wanted to do something, Xiaohua's figure that fell in midair suddenly spun strangely. He didn't use any magic power at all and steadily fell into the stream of water. Okay, Kaizhuoxia didn't know why, but she suddenly cried out. Xiaohua scratched his head, looked at Kaizhuoxia with an embarrassed smile, and went forward to try again. In the end, that stone wall's restriction was still as smooth as before. Xiaohua was the same as before, unable to move the stone wall away. Xiaohua slightly frowned. Thinking for a moment, he took out the devil's spear tip. Just as he wanted to use the spear tip to break the restriction, he was stopped by Kaizhuoxia. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, wait a moment. What's wrong?" "Fellow Taoist Kai?" Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. Kaizhuoxia shook her head and said, "This restriction is somewhat strange. In the information that I received, the restriction on this stone wall must be completely broken at the same time. Only then can the passage be completely opened. Otherwise, the restriction will have a backup plan that will destroy the mother-child spirit fruit in the passage. Just now, fellow Taoist Xiao used force to break the restriction. You should be able to move the entire stone wall away, and the backup plan of the restriction won't be triggered. If you use this spear tip to break the formation, I'm afraid there will be a bad result." "Ah, there's such a wonderful formation?" Hearing this, Xiaohua hurriedly put away the devil's spear tip. "Then what should we do?" Xiaohua didn't have any other methods besides using force to break the restriction. "I also have no other way." Kaizhuoxia slightly shook her head. "Unless we find another person whose magic power is even higher than I's." Although that's what she said, and in the cultivation world of the country of Shi, there were many cultivators with higher cultivation than Kaizhuoxia. But how many of them could Kaizhuoxia and Xiaohua trust? "How about, fellow Taoist Xiao, wait a moment. I will go and invite my sister over. She's a 7th-level qi refining cultivator. She should be able to break the restriction." Kaizhuoxia's eyes lit up. Fairy Hong Xia? Xiao Hua heard Kai Zhuoxia mention her before, so he said with a smile, "Of course it's possible." But Kai Zhuoxia slightly bit her pearly white teeth and said hesitantly, "When I came out, my sister was in closed-door cultivation. I'm afraid she still hasn't come out yet." Isn't that the same as not saying anything? Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and muttered in his stomach. The two of them pondered for half a day, but they still couldn't think of any good method, so they had no choice but to leave the sobbing Ming Mountains. After flying for a while, Xiao Hua's eyes suddenly lit up. He had a plan in his heart, so he cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Kai, how about this? Since we don't have any effective methods for the time being, we'll cultivate here first. If fellow Taoist can make a breakthrough, wouldn't we be able to open the passage?" Kai Zhuoxia bitterly smiled. She had just taken a foundation establishment pill, so it was easy for her to make a breakthrough. Even if she took another pill now, it was impossible for her magic power to increase by too much. The restriction on the stone wall still couldn't be broken. But, apart from this, what other methods did she have? After all, being able to pick the mother-child spirit fruit and refine the embryonic breathing pill was her only hope at this moment. "All right, we can only do this." Kai Zhuoxia slightly nodded. At this moment, she could be considered as being forced to do something beyond her ability. The two of them found a secluded place, and each of them found a clean cave, and started to cultivate. Before Xiao Hua entered the cave, he also asked for a copy of the method to use the array talisman to break the restriction on the stone wall. Kai Zhuoxia wasn't stingy and gave it to him. In a flash, several months passed. Kai Zhuoxia's cultivation was still at the same place, without any improvement. Xiao Hua's cultivation, with the support of the Clear Breeze pill and Marrow Cleansing pill, directly reached the peak of the third level of the Qi refining realm. But, just as Xiao Hua was about to take the last Marrow Cleansing pill and Clear Breeze pill to break through the bottleneck of the third level of the Qi refining realm and enter the fourth level, Kai Zhuoxia didn't want to. Seeing Kai Zhuoxia's summoning talisman, Xiao Hua could only get up from his closed-door cultivation and very helplessly push away the huge rock blocking the entrance of the cave. "Fellow Taoist Xiao." Outside the cave, Kai Zhuoxia was very apologetic. Just as she cupped her hands and was about to apologize, her eyes lit up again. She smiled, almost jealously, and said, "Congratulations, congratulations. I didn't expect that in a mere few months, fellow Taoist, your cultivation would advance again. You've already reached the peak of the third level of the Qi refining realm." Immediately, Kai Zhuoxia came to her senses and slapped her forehead. "I was too impatient. Alas, if it wasn't for I sending you a message, I'm afraid that fellow Taoist would have been able to enter the fourth level of the Qi refining realm in a little more than a month, right?" "Atonement, atonement." Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Look at what fellow Taoist Kai is saying. Fellow Taoist cultivated to the third level of the Qi refining realm many years ago. I only reached the third level of the Qi refining realm at such an age. What's there to be proud of?" Kai Zhuoxia slightly shook her head. She was very clear in her heart that from the second level of the Qi refining realm to the third level of the Qi refining realm, and then from the third level of the Qi refining realm to the fourth level of the Qi refining realm, she spent a lot of time. As for Xiao Hua, from the first level of the Qi refining realm she saw until now, he was at the peak of the third level of the Qi refining realm. How much time did he spend? Comparisons are odious. This was the only thought in Kai Zhuoxia's mind. "Fellow Taoist Kai, I haven't made any progress in these past few months. Counting with my fingers, it should be about time for my younger sister to come out of closed-door cultivation. We can't just stay here forever. If possible, I want to take a trip back to Luyang and see if I can call my younger sister over." Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Kai's idea is indeed wonderful. However, before fellow Taoist Kai leaves, I also want to give it a try and see if I can break the restriction on that stone wall." Kai Zhuoxia was overjoyed. She clapped her hands and said, "Could it be that fellow Taoist Zhao's strength has increased again in these past few months?" Xiao Hua smiled but didn't say anything. Soon after, the two of them tidied up and once again arrived in front of the stone wall. The flowing water in front of the stone wall was still gurgling, as if it hadn't changed at all due to the passage of time. -5. Chapter 1407. Xiao Hua walked in front of the stone wall and carefully examined it. Then, he extended his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Kai, I'll have to trouble you to lend me the talisman." "What? Talisman? Talisman?" Kai Zhuoxiao was originally looking forward to seeing Xiao Hua's divine power, but she didn't expect Xiao Hua to actually ask her for talisman. She stuttered for a moment. "Yes, talisman. I want to give it a try," Xiao Hua said, as expected. "How?" Kai Zhuoxiao originally wanted to say, "How is that possible?" But when the words reached her mouth, she hurriedly stopped. Then, she thought for a moment, patted her storage bag, took out several talismans, and handed them to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua had already asked Kai Zhuoxiao how to use talismans before entering closed-door cultivation. Moreover, the technique wasn't very complicated. To be honest, Xiao Hua had already practiced it skillfully a few days before he entered closed-door cultivation. Therefore, Xiao Hua took the talismans and didn't answer. He walked in front of the stone wall in a flash. Just like how Kai Zhuoxiao controlled the talismans several months ago, he calmly inserted the talismans into the stone wall one by one. Then, he also urged his magic power, formed a technique, and inserted the talismans into the stone wall one by one. Seeing the stone wall gradually flash with brilliance, Kai Zhuoxiao was completely dumbfounded. No matter if it was the technique Xiao Hua used to insert the talismans into the stone wall, or the technique he used to activate the technique, they were all extremely nimble. It was as if he had immersed himself in it for dozens of years. It was far from what she could compare to. And the resplendent brilliance on the stone wall, as well as the magic power displayed by Xiao Hua, also made Kai Zhuoxiao astonished. He's only at the peak of the third level of the Qi refining realm. His magic power, how can it be stronger than mine? Kai Zhuoxiao's mind turned rapidly, and the expression on her face was also uncertain. I'm at the peak of the fifth level of the Qi refining realm. I'm about to break through to the sixth level of the Qi refining realm. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The stone wall moved and made a series of rumbling sounds. In addition, there was the sound of water splashing. Xiao Hua actually used his own magic power to use a formation talisman to completely break the restriction on the stone wall. After the stone wall moved away, it revealed a stone cave that was about 10 feet in size. Xiao Hua bitterly smiled as he looked at the green and slippery moss all around the cave and the stream that occasionally flowed out. Ever since he came out of the 1,000-foot Peaks cave, he still had some lingering fear towards this cave. He didn't dare to rashly try it out. "Xiao, fellow Taoist Xiao," Kai Zhuoxiao couldn't help but ask with a stutter, Your magic power, how is it so deep?" "That's right. Not only is his divine power astonishing, even his magic power is more profound than a cultivator at the peak of the fifth layer of Qi refining. How can you let him live?" Xiao Hua looked at the pitch-black cave and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Kai, are there any restrictions in this cave?" Seeing that Xiao Hua didn't answer, Kai Zhuoxiao's face turned red. Thinking about it, this was his secret. If she asked for no reason, he definitely wouldn't answer. Kai Zhuoxiao calmed her mind and said with a smile, "Don't worry, fellow Taoist Xiao. This passage was used by the senior who discovered the mother-child spirit fruit. He only placed a restriction on the stone walls, but there is no restriction inside." "Oh," Xiao Hua nodded slightly and turned his head to ask, "Then, I'll lead the way in front. What do you think, fellow Taoist Kai?" Kai Zhuoxiao was a bit hesitant. Xiao Hua leading the way in front would certainly reduce her danger by a lot, but on the other hand, Xiao Hua could see the mother-child spirit fruit first. Wouldn't she lose the initiative? Just as Kai Zhuoxiao was hesitating, she inadvertently saw Xiao Hua's thought-provoking gaze. Kai Zhuoxiao's heart immediately trembled. The current Xiao Hua was no longer the little cultivator at the first layer of Qi refining she met before the new year. Since Xiao Hua could kill the blue twin bears and also have the severe might of a 7th-layer Qi refining cultivator, then she was definitely not Xiao Hua's opponent. Since he was leading the way, he obviously had the intention of letting her take advantage of him. Why should she think so much? Thinking of this, Kai Zhuoxiao immediately cupped her hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, please go first." Xiao Hua nodded. then clapped his hands and took out the demonic spear shaft from his storage pouch. Taking advantage of the situation, he made a staff flower-like move in his hand. Urging his magic power, he flew into the cave. Kai Zhuoxia's gaze was very complicated as she looked at Xiaohua's back. In her mind, Xiaohua's confidence and the very strange staff in his hand flashed. Sighing, she took out a moonstone from her storage pouch and also followed him. Ever since Xiaohua used a strange move to fight Firmament Shocker in the Qiming Mountain range several months ago, Xiaohua thought about his very strange staff technique for a long time. When he was in closed-door cultivation and cultivating his cultivation method, he also took out the demonic spear shaft and familiarized himself with it. Although he didn't have a clear memory in his mind, when he fumbled with his hands, he actually remembered the 360 moves of the staff technique. And at the same time that he recalled the staff technique, the name of the staff technique, Heavenly Staff Technique, also appeared in Xiaohua's mind. What an arrogant name! This was Xiaohua's only thought at that time. In the following few months, Xiaohua often practiced this Heavenly Staff Technique. Therefore, when he took out the demonic spear shaft just now, he very naturally made a staff flower-like move with the demonic spear shaft. Xiaohua flew in front, holding the demonic spear shaft in one hand and the moonstone in the other. The cave was pitch black and also very long. Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia flew for a cup of tea's worth of time before they saw light. When Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia flew out of the mountain path, they discovered that this was a space of several hundred feet in size. This space was surrounded by towering stone walls, and above them were verdant vines that tightly covered this space. Moreover, those vines were abruptly hanging high in the sky. If there wasn't a strange restriction, Xiaohua wouldn't believe it no matter what. Xiaohua first sized up the surroundings, then flew into the space and landed on the ground. Kai Zhuoxia flew in after him, but before she could land, it was as if she was struck by lightning. Her gaze was lifeless as she looked at a spirit fruit that was taller than a person not far in front of her. That spirit fruit stem was as thick as a fist, and at the top was a gourd-like object. However, this object was flat, more like half a gourd. Moreover, that gourd-like protrusion was raised high up, facing the light between the vines and the sky. Mother-child spirit fruit, Kai Zhuoxia murmured. It's really the mother-child spirit fruit? This is the mother-child spirit fruit? Xiaohua was a bit baffled. He thought that the mother-child spirit fruit was two spirit fruits that were born together, one big and one small. He didn't expect that this spirit fruit that was like half a gourd was actually the mother-child spirit fruit. Fellow Taoist Xiao, take a look. That mother-child spirit fruit is thin on the top and thick on the bottom. Isn't it the appearance of a pregnant baby? That's why it's called the mother-child spirit fruit. Kai Zhuoxia's gaze was somewhat infatuated as she explained in a low voice. Oh, so it's like that. Xiaohua understood. At the same time, he also thought to himself, embryonic breathing pill. Is it also related to this pregnant baby? Fellow Taoist Xiao, this mother-child spirit fruit, how are you and I going to split it? Kai Zhuoxia came back to her senses and asked somewhat hesitantly, Fellow Taoist Kai, there are still many mother-child spirit fruits in this space. I'm afraid it's enough for us to pick. Xiaohua used his finger to point and said with a smile. Kai Zhuoxia smiled bitterly and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao probably still doesn't understand the characteristics of this mother-child spirit fruit. Although there are many mother-child spirit fruits in this space, but only one stalk is the true mother-child spirit fruit. Without waiting for this stalk of mother-child spirit fruit to be picked, all the other mother-child spirit fruits won't truly mature. Hee, isn't that simple? Pick the mature one. Wait for the next one to mature, then we'll just pick it. Xiaohua very naturally thought. There is a gap of 10 years between two mature mother-child spirit fruits. Kai Zhuoxia said calmly. Ah, so it's like that. The corner of Xiaohua's mouth curled, and he said in astonishment then, how are these mother-child spirit fruits grown? It's said that if a mature mother-child spirit fruit isn't refined into embryonic breathing pill, then its fruit will contain the seeds of the mother-child spirit fruit. When the fruit is fully ripe, the entire fruit will burst open, and the seeds will also scatter in all directions, growing into a new mother-child spirit fruit. Kai Zhuoxia explained very detailedly. Then, is this stalk mature? Xiaohua pointed at the mother-child spirit fruit in front of him and asked. Kai Zhuoxia shook her head. No, that mature mother-child spirit fruit's fruit will have light gold stripes on it. This fruit is still light green, so it definitely isn't. Xiaohua's eyes turned, and he said with a smile, since it's like that, you and I will split it 60-40. You and I will split up to search, and whoever finds it will get 60% of the embryonic breathing pill. Really? Kai Zhuoxia said with joy at the unexpected turn of events. Of course, go ahead. I always keep my word. Xiaohua said with a grin. Good. Kai Zhuoxia was overjoyed, and she followed the direction that Xiaohua pointed to search. Xiaohua waited for Kai Zhuoxia to walk far away, and with a wave of his hand, he took out the puppet from the space. He cast a spell, and the puppet automatically dug out all the mother-child spirit fruits from the ground. Xiaohua himself also walked slowly. Every time he walked in front of a mother-child spirit fruit, he would patiently cast a spell, transplanting these mother-child spirit fruits into his space one by one. Just when Xiaohua and the puppet transplanted the 20th mother-child spirit fruit into the space, Kai Zhuoxia's exclamation suddenly came from afar. Xiaohua didn't dare to neglect, and he stored the puppet into the space. His figure flew up, and he flew towards the place where Kai Zhuoxia exclaimed. Without waiting for Xiaohua to fly to the place where the sound came from, he saw Kai Zhuoxia flying back from afar in a panic, and behind her, there was a huge dragonfly chasing after her. That dragonfly was 3 feet long, and its entire body was red. Within the red, there were many leopard patterns. On top of its head, fist-sized eyes were flickering with red light, and its light red wings were flashing extremely quickly. Its flying speed was only slightly slower than Kai Zhuoxia's. Leopard dragonfly? Xiaohua was slightly stunned when he saw this. This was a first-grade spirit beast recorded in the insect scripture. Xiaohua obtained the insect scripture from a disciple of the spirit husbandry sect in the southern colored plain. He had never read it carefully, and only took it out to read it after encountering the spirit-seeking mouse. I didn't expect it to be the guardian spirit beast of the mother-child spirit fruit. At this moment, Kai Zhuoxia also saw Xiaohua, and her face revealed a happy expression. Her figure flew towards Xiaohua. -5. Chapter 1408. At this moment, in Kai Zhuoxia's heart, Xiaohua was no longer a first-layer aura refining cultivator, nor was he a low-level disciple whom she wanted to repay with some kindness. Instead, he was a mysterious cultivator whose cultivation level was a bit higher than hers, and who also had endless strength. This was a fact that Kai Zhuoxia was unwilling to admit, but she had no choice but to face. Therefore, when Kai Zhuoxia saw Xiaohua while being chased by the leopard dragonfly, she immediately wanted to fly towards him. However, when Xiaohua saw this, he slightly frowned. Seeing Xiaohua's strange expression, Kai Zhuoxia was also bewildered, but she immediately realized that although the leopard dragonfly was the guardian spirit beast of the mother-child spirit fruit, it was only a first-rank spirit beast after all. Its strength was only comparable to a 5th-layer aura refining cultivator. Her current cultivation level was also at the peak of the 5th-layer aura refining realm, so she should be able to fight against the leopard dragonfly. If she lured the leopard dragonfly to Xiaohua as soon as she met him, wouldn't she not be of any use in this process of finding the mother-child spirit fruit? Since she couldn't be of any use, what qualifications did she have to obtain more mother-child spirit fruits? After thinking it through, Kai Zhuoxia's expression turned cold. She clenched her teeth, turned around, and lured the leopard dragonfly to another place. While Kai Zhuoxia was hesitating, the leopard dragonfly had already caught up. Its wings buzzed and flashed, and its dragonfly tail, which was like a wooden stick, suddenly danced rapidly. Then, the head of the leopard dragonfly suddenly stretched forward, and a sharp, long icicle pierced towards Kai Zhuoxia's back with lightning speed. Kai Zhuoxia had just turned around when the icicle pierced towards her. Greatly shocked, Kai Zhuoxia hurriedly twisted her body and did her best to dodge, but the icicle was too fast. With a flash of brilliance on Kai Zhuoxia's back, The iron cloak talisman she had previously put on was pierced by the icicle. Moreover, the icicle's momentum wasn't over yet, and it stabbed diagonally into Kai Zhuoxia's Taoist robe and into her back. Fortunately, Kai Zhuoxia reacted quickly and dodged, so the icicle didn't pierce her vital points and only stabbed diagonally into her back and shoulder. While Kai Zhuoxia was in pain, she took out the fireball talisman in her hand and threw it without hesitation. However, something shocking happened. The leopard dragonfly didn't seem to panic as the fireball grew larger and larger. It waved its tail rapidly, and a snow-like spiritual energy flew toward the fireball to cover it. Rumble. The fireball talisman exploded, but it was blocked by the spiritual energy of ice and snow. The leopard dragonfly was not injured in the slightest. However, Kai Zhuoxia took advantage of this opportunity to escape far away. Xiao Hua saw that Kai Zhuoxia had lured the leopard dragonfly away, and he understood in his heart. With a wave of his hand, he took out the puppet again and had it continue to dig out the mother-child spirit fruits. Then, he concealed himself and directly flew towards where Kai Zhuoxia had come from. Not long after, Xiao Hua's nose smelled a whiff of frankincense. Looking over, there was a dazzling golden object about 10 zhang away. It was a ripe mother-child spirit fruit. When Xiao Hua flew closer, he unconsciously narrowed his eyes. This ripe mother-child spirit fruit was different from the unripe ones he had seen before. This mother-child spirit fruit no longer looked like a gourd from its outer appearance. The top of the gourd had already shrunk a lot and gradually condensed into a sphere, similar to the shape of a human head. The bottom of the gourd was even larger, like the belly of a full month pregnant. At this time, the entire body of the mother-child spirit fruit was entwined with golden fine lines. They looked like runes, but they weren't runes, emitting a faint brilliance. Xiao Hua's brows furrowed even tighter. When he learned that Kai Zhuoxia had obtained this mother-child spirit fruit from Qing Fengmin's storage pouch, he was somewhat puzzled. This thing was only the main ingredient of the cultivation world's embryonic breathing pill. It had nothing to do with the devil world. So what did Qing Fengmin want it for? Of course, Xiao Hua also suspected that Qing Fengmin had obtained it from other cultivators. But looking at this mother-child spirit fruit that looked like a pregnant woman, and then thinking about Qing Fengmin's blood shadow's appearance, Xiao Hua felt that there must be some connection. Fortunately, that evil blood shadow has already been destroyed by Li Zongbao. This place, if it was Qing Fengmin's doing, I won't have any more doubts, Xiao Hua thought to himself. Then, Xiao Hua didn't recklessly pick the mother-child spirit fruit. Instead, he carefully sized up his surroundings. When he felt that there wasn't anything abnormal, he pinched his hand and urged his magic power, wanting to pick the mother-child spirit fruit. But when the magic seal touched the mother-child spirit fruit, the mother-child spirit fruit flashed with brilliance and actually blocked Xiao Hua's magic seal to the side. Ouch! Xiao Hua was startled in his heart. Not good. Sure enough, just as Xiao Hua was startled, a ripple of brilliance appeared at the location of the vines in the air. Immediately after, a ball of slightly jet-black brilliance formed a sphere and struck down at the location of the mother-child spirit fruit. And the leopard dragonfly chasing Kai Zhuoxia was also alarmed by the abnormal movement in the space. It abandoned Kai Zhuoxia and turned around to fly back. Hee! When Xiao Hua saw the jet-black brilliance, his heart calmed down. With a wave of his hand, the demonic spear came out. Then, his figure suddenly flew up, and a move of the heavenly staff technique directly hit that jet-black brilliance. It was also strange. That brilliance seemed to be invisible, but under the demonic spear and under Xiao Hua's ingenious staff technique, it actually hit the jet-black brilliance. That brilliance quickly flashed a few times and then disappeared. Roar! In the distance, there was the angry roar of a cheetah. Xiao Hua was stunned. How can there be cheetahs in this space? But immediately, Xiao Hua understood that this was probably the leopard dragonfly's roar. Therefore, Xiao Hua didn't dare to hesitate any longer. He put away the demonic spear and took out the demonic spear tip. Gathering all the strength in his body, he stabbed at the lower part of the mother-child spirit fruit. Kacha! Like glass shattering, the brilliance was annihilated. The restriction around the mother-child spirit fruit was indeed broken by Xiaohua. At the same time, a large ripple of brilliance above the space was brewing an even greater attack. Xiaohua's expression didn't change. He casually cast a spell and plucked that pale golden mother-child spirit fruit, calmly putting it into his storage bag. As for the stem below the mother-child spirit fruit, it immediately shrank rapidly and soon disappeared. Roar! There was another angry roar of the leopard dragonfly. At this time, it was already within 100 feet. Xiaohua's lips curled into a faint smile. His figure leisurely floated up and flew towards the leopard dragonfly. The leopard dragonfly fiercely flapped its wings. Every time it flashed, a roar would come from its wings. Seeing that Xiaohua was actually coming head-on, the leopard dragonfly stretched out its head and shot out icicles at lightning speed. Why would Xiaohua fight with it? Seeing the icicles flying towards him, he quickly dodged them and flew towards the puppet. In this short period of time, the puppet had dug out more than 10 mother-child spirit fruits. Xiaohua passed by these mother-child spirit fruits, and with a wave of his hand, he kept them together with the puppet into the space. Then, with a loud laugh, he flew towards the entrance of the space without consulting anyone. Before he could fly to the entrance, he saw Kai Zhuoxia flying up with a joyful expression. "Let's go, fellow Taoist Kai." Xiaohua didn't beat around the bush and waved his hand with a smile. "Congratulations, fellow Taoist Xiao." Kai Zhuoxia laughed softly and also turned to follow Xiaohua. Roar, roar. The leopard dragonfly behind them kept roaring. Unfortunately, in this several hundred feet space, Xiaohua's flying speed was really too fast. It simply couldn't catch up. When it flew to the entrance of the cave, Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia's figures had already disappeared inside the cave. Looking at the pitch-black cave, the leopard dragonfly didn't dare to go forward. It could only flap its wings and hover up and down. At this time, there was a faint scent of milk in the space, and it immediately disappeared. The leopard dragonfly seemed to have calmed down. It turned around and flew towards a corner of the space. In that corner, a mother-child spirit fruit appeared to have a faint golden color. Several days later, on the foothills of a mountain covered with green cypresses and pine trees, Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia stood on top of a pine tree. Their expressions were relaxed. Kai Zhuoxia smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, we have been rushing for several days. This place is already far away from the Weiming mountain range. It can be considered safe. We can finally relax." Xiaohua turned his head and looked behind him. He said with some lingering fear, "Of course. I didn't expect that the periphery of the Weiming mountain range also had powerful spirit beasts. They actually flew so fast. If it wasn't for our vigilance and immediately escaping after coming out of the cave, we might really have been buried in the Weiming mountain range." Kai Zhuoxia's face was also a little panicked. She nodded and said, "The leopard dragonfly inside the cave couldn't be dealt with. Who would have thought that there was actually a fire cloud sparrow hiding above the stone wall? If fellow Taoist Zhao's flying speed wasn't fast, I'm afraid I would have already lost my life. Let's not talk about this anymore. Since we have already escaped, those things are already in the past." Xiaohua waved his hand. He clapped his hand and took out a jade box. He handed it over to Kai Zhuoxia and said, "This is the mother-child spirit fruit. Fellow Taoist Kai, please keep it first." Looking at the mother-child spirit fruit in front of her, Kai Zhuoxia really didn't dare to believe her eyes. She immediately pushed it back and said, "This mother-child spirit fruit was picked by fellow Taoist Xiao. Moreover, I was very clear about the process. Other than the location of this stone wall being provided by I, everything else was all thanks to fellow Taoist. Moreover, the location of this stone wall was also recorded in the things that fellow Taoist Xiao gave I indirectly. It is also fellow Taoist Zhao's." Kai Zhuoxia pursed her lips and said with a bitter smile, "I really didn't contribute anything. How can I take this mother-child spirit fruit?" Seeing Xiaohua frown, Kai Zhuoxia said again, "Moreover, this thing, without Yin Liwei's recommendation, we still don't know how to find someone to refine the embryonic breathing pill. Temporarily leaving it with I. I'm afraid it's not safe. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please take it." Let's talk about it again after I think of a way to find someone to refine the pill. So it's like this. Xiaohua thought about it and also agreed. He also didn't hold back and put the mother-child spirit fruit into his space. Soon after, he said, I actually have a way. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. -5. Chapter 1409. Huh. What good idea does fellow Taoist Xiao have? Hearing this, Kai Zhuoxia's heart was happy at first, but then she became a bit sad. The more tricks Xiaohua had, the less useful she would be, and the embryonic breathing pills she would get would naturally be less. Xiaohua didn't see Kai Zhuoxia's sadness and said with a smile, Doesn't Yin Ganwei have a direct elder in Xuanyin School? If we find a disciple we're familiar with in Xuanyin School, wouldn't we also be able to find a famous pill master? I don't know Xuanyin School's disciples. Kai Zhuoxia shook her head. The disciples of the country of Xi's 3 major sects are all arrogant, not easy to get along with. My Luyang's Kai family's strength is small, simply not enough to enter their discerning eyes. Immediately, Kai Zhuoxia came to a realization. Could it be? Fellow Taoist Xiao knows Xuanyin School's disciples? But ordinary disciples, I'm afraid they can't say anything. Kai Zhuoxia added somewhat worriedly, Is that so? Xiaohua also scratched his head and asked, Then, what about 11th level Qi refining disciples? Will they be useful? Great. Kai Zhuoxia heard and her face was somewhat happy. This cultivation level is just right. It's just enough. Xiaohua didn't understand and asked curiously, Why? Fellow Taoist Xiao, the 11th level of Qi refining is the most delicate period of the Qi refining realm, and also the most crucial period. If a disciple of a cultivation sect breaks through to the 12th level of Qi refining, they'll have divine sense, and with the foundation establishment pill, the cultivation level of foundation establishment should be within reach. Therefore, 11th level Qi refining disciples are very sensitive in cultivation sections. No one knows if this disciple can break through to the peak of Qi refining. If they really offend them, they might break through to foundation establishment, and it'll be difficult to avoid awkwardness when they meet in the future. Kai Zhuoxia's smile was like a flower as she explained. Moreover, this embryonic breathing pill is the most useful for breaking through bottlenecks. Presumably, that Xuanyin School's 11th level Qi refining disciple will also help fellow Taoist Xiao, right? Hearing this, Xiaohua's heart was also overjoyed. Kai Zhuoxia's words were extremely right. Could Xuanyin School's Zhuo Qingyuan reject this embryonic breathing pill delivered to his door? Even if Xiaohua didn't meet him in Jinghua City and he didn't send him a summoning talisman, Zhuo Qingyuan would still eagerly help. I wonder which disciple of Xuanyin School fellow Xiao is acquainted with? Should we rush to Xuanyin School right now? Kai Zhuoxia asked joyfully. Xiaohua thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, I still have some things to do, so for the time being, I can't go. Kai Zhuoxia was stunned and whispered, Then when can we go? It's hard to say, maybe a few days, maybe a few months. Xiaohua looked at the clear and cloudless sky and said, I want to cultivate in seclusion here, strive to break through to the 4th level of the aura refining realm. I don't know how long it will take. If fellow Taoist Kai doesn't want to wait here, you can go to other places. When I come out of seclusion, I'll send you a messaging talisman. When Kai Zhuoxia heard this, she inwardly nodded her head. Xiaohua had already reached the peak of the 3rd layer of the Qi refining realm, so it was time for him to attempt to break through the bottleneck and step into the 4th layer of the Qi refining realm in one go. If he really failed, then it wouldn't be too late to seek out the embryonic breathing pill. However, when Kai Zhuoxia broke through the bottleneck that year, the time she spent was calculated in years. If Xiaohua cultivated in seclusion here for several years, she couldn't always accompany him here, right? Therefore, Kai Zhuoxia thought for a moment and said with a smile, I can understand fellow Taoist Zhao's feelings, but the range of a messaging talisman is limited. If I'm too far away, I'm afraid fellow Taoist will find me. How about this? I will also cultivate nearby and wait for fellow Taoist for a while. If fellow Taoist still hasn't broken through, I will first return to Luyang's Kai clan. I haven't returned since I left for more than a year, so I'm somewhat worried. When fellow Taoist comes out of seclusion, How about we go straight to Luyang to find I? On the other hand, I can also introduce my younger sister to fellow Taoist Xiao. Great. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and said, let's do as fellow Taoist Kai says. I've often heard fellow Taoist mention your younger sister, Fairy Hong Xia, so I'd like to see her. Soon after, the two of them each found a secret place and started to cultivate in seclusion just like before. Actually, in Kai Zhuoxia's heart, this kind of seclusion really wasn't necessary because it had only been a dozen or so days since they went into seclusion last time. If Xiao Hua could break through, he would have already broken through last time. Why wait until now? Moreover, based on Kai Zhuoxia's experience, since one encountered a bottleneck, one couldn't just cultivate in seclusion. One had to go out and travel to see if there were any fated chances. This time, Kai Zhuoxia's travels were exactly like this. She just happened to come across a foundation-building pill, which allowed her to break through to the peak of the 5th layer of the aura refining realm. Of course, as for whether or not taking the foundation-building pill was not worth the loss, it wasn't something Kai Zhuoxia could consider for the time being. Therefore, Kai Zhuoxia went into seclusion in the cave for 2 months before coming out. She prepared to return to Luyang's Kai clan first and bring back the foundation-building pills and other items she obtained from Thousandjiang Peak. With these foundation-building pills, Luyang's Kai clan's overall strength might be able to rise by a level. This could also be considered Kai Zhuoxia's contribution to her clan. When Kai Zhuoxia came out of the cave, it was a sunny day. She squinted her eyes and looked at the blazing sun in the sky. She took a deep breath and used a flying talisman on her body. She didn't even look at Xiao Hua's mountain peak and directly flew in a certain direction. However, when Kai Zhuoxia leaped into the air and flew a few hundred feet, she suddenly heard Xiao Hua's voice behind her. Fellow Taoist Kai, why didn't you send me a summoning talisman after coming out of seclusion? Xiao Hua anxiously flew out from the mountain peak he was cultivating in seclusion and caught up with Kai Zhuoxia in a few breaths. So fellow Taoist Xiao came out of seclusion a long time ago. Kai Zhuoxia didn't turn her head and replied with a smile. It seems fellow Taoist Xiao. As she spoke, Kai Zhuoxia turned around. However, when she saw Xiao Hua, she couldn't help but be dumbstruck. She pointed her finger at Xiao Hua in disbelief and said, You're actually already in the early 4th layer of the Qi refining realm? Xiao Hua's expression was as calm as the wind and clouds, as if this was an extremely unremarkable progress. He said with a smile, even if I'm in the 4th layer of the Qi refining realm, I'm still only in the early stages of the Qi refining realm. Compared to fellow Taoist Kai who's in the middle stages of the Qi refining realm, there's still a huge difference. Kai Zhuoxia let out a groan. She almost resisted the shock in her heart and said, fellow Taoist Zhao's magic power in the 3rd layer of the Qi refining realm is already stronger than the peak of the 5th layer of the Qi refining realm. Wouldn't this early 4th layer of the Qi refining realm be comparable to the 6th or 7th layer of the Qi refining realm? Fellow Taoist, breaking through bottlenecks is as smooth as ordinary cultivation. Foundation establishment should be as easy as lifting a hand. That's right, Kai Zhuoxia definitely didn't expect that Xiao Hua would actually break through to the 4th layer of the Qi refining realm in just 2 months. When she heard the noise earlier, she thought it was Xiao Hua coming out of seclusion in advance because he saw that things weren't going well. Not at all. Foundation establishment is easier said than done. Thinking about Li Zongbao's abnormal state when he stepped into the foundation establishment realm, Xiao Hua's heart was filled with envy. However, he also knew that right now, he was only in the early stages of the Qi refining realm. The distance between him and that realm wasn't just a tiny bit. Fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't need to be modest. Previously, I thought that apart from the disciples of the great cultivation sects, my younger sister was a person with outstanding talent. However, compared to fellow Taoist Xiao, my younger sister is still lacking by quite a bit. Kai Zhuoxia said with a bitter smile. Family members know family matters best. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Then, he looked in the direction Kai Zhuoxia was going and asked, fellow Taoist Kai, are you going back to Luyang? Yes, that's right. I didn't expect that fellow Taoist Xiao would come out of seclusion so early. I wanted to return to Luyang first. Then what about now? Kai Zhuoxia's eyes flashed with a trace of passion as she said with a smile. Since fellow Taoist Xiao has come out of seclusion, we naturally have to go to Xuanyan cult. I also want to quickly obtain the embryonic breathing pill so that I can quickly break through my bottleneck. Oh, that's right. Fellow Taoist Kai, apart from refining the embryonic breathing pill, does this mother-child spirit fruit have any other miraculous uses? Xiaohua suddenly thought of something and hurriedly asked, Other miraculous uses? Kai Zhuoxia stared blankly. I wonder what fellow Taoist Xiao knows? This. I also don't know. I just want to ask. Xiaohua said with a smile. This doesn't seem to have any other uses. Kai Zhuoxia thought carefully for a moment and shook her head. I also don't understand alchemy. These are all hearsay. Moreover, my Kai clan has never obtained the mother-child spirit fruit. I can't answer fellow Taoist's question. Oh, Xiaohua nodded and said, then forget it. Let's wait for another opportunity to ask other cultivators. It's still early. Fellow Taoist Kai, shall we depart? Of course. There are still several tens of days of travel from here to Xuanyan cult. How can we not depart early? Kai Zhuoxia smiled. Her figure unfolded and flew in another direction. At the same time that Kai Zhuoxia and Xiaohua set off for Xuanyan cult, in front of the hidden stone wall in the sobbing Ming Mountains, another mysterious cultivator arrived. This cultivator wore a camouflage robe. His face couldn't be seen and his cultivation couldn't be seen. This cultivator very familiarly landed in front of the stone wall. He patted his hand and took out several talismans from his storage pouch. Similarly, he struck them at various places on the stone wall. Then, he very easily struck out a spell seal, revealing the black hole behind the stone wall. That cultivator turned his head to look. Then, his figure flew into the black hole. After the cultivator entered, the stone wall also slowly closed up after he struck a spell seal. When that cultivator entered the space, he was also very careful. When he familiarly arrived at the place where Xiaohua picked the mother-child spirit fruit, he looked at the empty ground and couldn't help but be startled. After a long while, he let out a hoarse voice, as if he was talking to himself. Who would come here? Li Zongbao? Kai Zhuoxia? Or Xiaohua? They shouldn't know the secret of the nascent cultivating fruit. Oh, the mother-child spirit fruit. When this mysterious cultivator finished looking through the entire space, he sighed and said, Li Zongbao, little vile spawn, you actually dared to spoil this old man's great plans. This old man has been waiting for this mother-child spirit fruit for many years. All this time, I haven't picked it. It was all for today. Who would have thought that this little bastard would take the initiative? If you want to pick it, just pick it. Why did you transplant so many of this old man's mother-child spirit fruit? Just based on your utmost happiness factions methods, can you raise this mother-child spirit fruit? -5. Chapter 14:10. Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia each flew up and activated their flying talismans, flying in the direction of Xuanyan School. As early as when he was at the peak of the qi refining stage, Xiaohua's flying speed was comparable to the peak of the qi refining stage. Now, needless to say, Xiaohua didn't move, leisurely following beside Kai Zhuoxia. When Kai Zhuoxia spoke to Xiaohua, it was obviously different from before. Her tone was a bit more respectful, but in her heart, she was a bit more curious. The bottleneck from the third level of the qi refining stage to the fourth level of the qi refining stage is admittedly not as difficult as the fourth level of the qi refining stage to the fifth level of the qi refining stage. But, after all, it is still a big leap. Kai Zhuoxia has never heard of a non-cultivation sect disciple who could smoothly cross the bottleneck in 2 months. Even her sister, who was already a genius in her eyes, used nearly half a year of bitter cultivation to enter the fourth level of the qi refining stage from the third level of the qi refining stage. The more Kai Zhuoxia thought about it, the more she felt that Xiaohua's body was full of mystery, and the more she felt it was inconceivable. However, this kind of cultivation is a cultivator's biggest secret. Even within the same sect, they wouldn't reveal it, not to mention the relationship between Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia. Xiaohua didn't know the location of Xuanyan School, but he also didn't ask much. Along the way, he chatted with Kai Zhuoxia and learned a lot about the cultivation world in the country of Xi. Just a few times, Xiaohua deliberately led the topic to the Utopia faction and Li Zongbao, wanting to probe Kai Zhuoxia's thoughts. Who knew that Kai Zhuoxia would change the topic, as if she had never met Li Zongbao? Xiaohua smiled bitterly in his heart and didn't ask any more questions. This kind of thing all depends on fate. Admittedly, he knew some of Li Zongbao's intentions, but after all, he wasn't Li Zongbao. So many things were better left unsaid. On this day, while the two were flying, they suddenly saw a group of young men and women, about 10 people. The men had delicate features, extremely handsome, and the women had white teeth, red lips, almond-shaped eyes, and rosy cheeks. They were incomparably beautiful. Moreover, the most shocking thing was that these 10 men and women were about 10 years old, but their cultivation levels were at the 7th or 8th level of the qi refining stage, which really made Xiaohua admire them. Even more surprising was the fact that these young cultivators were all wearing different clothes. It would appear that they were not disciples from the same sect. The fact that these young cultivators with high cultivation bases were chatting and laughing together was truly eye-catching. Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia were also very careful on the way. Whenever they encountered people with higher cultivation than them, they would avoid them. They would even stand respectfully from a distance. They absolutely didn't want to provoke any trouble. This time was also the same. They saw these young men and women immediately stop in midair, waiting for these people to pass by them. Those young men and women were talking to each other, seemingly ignoring Xiaohua and the others. However, in the blink of an eye, they flew past them. Looking at everyone's receding figures, Xiaohua smacked his lips and said in a low voice, "Did you see that, fellow Taoist Kai?" During this time, fellow Taoist has been talking about look at them. They're all in their teens and their cultivations have reached the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. They're real experts. Kai Zhuoxia was also puzzled. She said, "These cultivators look young and their cultivation levels are high. However, they don't seem to be from a cultivation sect. Could it be that they are disciples of a cultivation family? But since they are disciples of a cultivation family, how can they be gathered together? Could it be that something happened in the cultivation world of our country of Xi? Oh, so they are disciples of a cultivation family." Hearing this, Xiaohua immediately understood. Cultivation families were second only to cultivation sections. Their disciples were nurtured with medicinal pills or secret techniques since they were young. It was reasonable for them to reach the 8th layer of the aura refining realm at such a young age. Ever since Kai Zhuoxia left Jingbua City, she came to Thousandjiang Peak and didn't go to Jingbua City again. Of course, she didn't understand what happened. Moreover, her Luyang's Kai clan could barely be considered a cultivation family. Even if something happened between cultivation families, they wouldn't inform her. Therefore, Kai Zhuoxia was still lacking in this aspect. "Let's go. They have their own matters, and we have our own matters. Let's go about our own business." Xiaohua lacked interest in cultivation families and was too lazy to inquire. He only urged his magic power and flew away. Kai Zhuoxia looked at the already disappearing figure and sighed slightly before following. However, the matter wasn't over yet. In the next few days, Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia would encounter several groups of young cultivators every day. Moreover, each one was more handsome than the other and more gorgeous than the other. Xiaohua was almost dumbstruck. "Fellow Taoist Kai, this cultivation family's disciples, are they all so outstanding?" Xiaohua muttered in his heart, "They are all so handsome. How can they still let others live?" as he asked Kai Zhuoxia. Kai Zhuoxia laughed out loud. She covered her mouth and said, "I'll let fellow Taoist Xiao know that anyone who can set foot on the path of cultivation is a dragon or phoenix among men. Not to mention their heavenly talent, even their appearance is rarely seen. Moreover, cultivation families attach the most importance to bloodline and family background. If their families aren't well-matched, they absolutely won't form a marriage alliance. Fellow Taoist, think about it. How can people with this kind of bloodline not be heavenly talents? Even if there is a slight difference in cultivation aptitude, their appearance and temperament are 100 times stronger than ordinary people." "Oh, so that's how it is." Xiaohua somewhat understood, but he immediately asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist Kai seems to also be a member of a cultivation family. How?" Xiaohua's question was really indecent. However, He and Kai Zhuoxia could be considered to have gone through several life and death situations, and their friendship was also not ordinary. Kai Zhuoxia only blushed and covered her mouth, saying, "I am an anomaly and can't be counted." He. Xiaohua knew that he had misspoken and didn't dare to ask more. Just as he was about to urge the flight talisman, he heard Kai Zhuoxia cry out in surprise, "Oh my, someone from Su Yinyun's family also came." Su Yinyun's family? Xiaohua asked curiously, "Are they very famous?" Kai Zhuoxia's eyes looked into the distance, and her expression was somewhat strange. She said in a low voice, "Qing Yang's Kai family and Su Yinyun's family, one is in the north of the country of Xi, and the other is in the south of the country of Xi. In the cultivation world, there is a saying that the Yun family is even more powerful than the Kai family. Look at the one in front of you. He's called Yun Guichong, and he's said to be an unparalleled figure of the Yun family." Just as she was speaking, for young cultivators about the same age as Xiaohua flew to the left of Xiaohua and the others. The one in the lead had a tall and sturdy figure, with a tiger's back and an ape's waist. He wore a neat Taoist robe. When Xiaohua saw him clearly, he couldn't help but feel jealous again. He saw that this person's face was fair and clean, and his appearance was like jade. In addition to his lacquer-like eyes and thick eyebrows, his entire body seemed to be without the slightest flaw. It was precisely the Yun Guichong that Kai Zhuoxia spoke of. This guy is the unparalleled Yun Guichong of the Yun family? How could he look like this? Do they still want others to live? Xiaohua muttered again. Yun Guichong seemed to have also seen Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia, and a strange expression appeared on his face. His originally flying figure stopped, and he flew in front of Kai Zhuoxia. He glanced at Xiaohua, cupped his hands, and said to Kai Zhuoxia, "Fellow Taoist Kai, I didn't expect to meet you here. It's truly an honor." As he spoke, his gaze looked to the left, as if he was looking for someone. "Fellow Taoist Yun, what a coincidence. It should have been 3 years since we last met, right? I didn't expect fellow Taoist cultivation to be so fast. You've actually already set foot into the high level of the aura refining realm. This is truly worthy of celebration." Kai Zhuoxia's face was full of smiles again, and she cupped her hands in return. At this time, the 3 people behind Yun Guichong also flew over. The 3 of them were 2 men and a woman, and they all looked to be in the 6th level of the aura refining realm. Moreover, their faces were all handsome and charming. The 3 of them flew over with surprise on their faces. The female cultivator whispered, "Big brother, this fellow Taoist, who is he?" "Haha, come, fellow Taoist Kai, let me introduce you. These 3 are disciples of the Yun family. The last time I went to the Kai family, they were still young, so they didn't follow me. They haven't met fellow Taoist yet." Yun Guichong smiled and pointed to the female cultivator next to him. "Her name is Yun Lan. She's 16 years old this year, the same age as Fairy Hongxia." Fairy Hongxia? When Yun Lan and the other 2 heard this, their faces were filled with anger. Without waiting for Yun Guichong to finish his introduction, Yun Lan waved her hand and said, "Big brother, that's enough. Isn't she the disciple of the famous Kai family of Luyang? I've heard of her long ago." "Don't be rude," Yun Guichong scolded with a cold face. "Isn't she?" Yun Lan stiffened her neck and said, "Big brother, what kind of person are you? So many young and beautiful female cultivators are fighting to marry Big brother, but Big brother doesn't like any of them. Instead, he likes Fairy Hongxia from the Kai family of Luyang. Humph, she's not even a direct descendant of the Kai family of Qingyang. Why is she so precious? She actually rejected Big brother and even said that she's still young, and that her priority is cultivation. She won't consider dual cultivation for the time being. Take a look at what the elder sister looks like, and how beautiful the younger sister can be. I'm afraid she rejected him because she doesn't dare to meet anyone." Yun Lan. Yun Guichong's expression changed drastically. He pointed to the distance and said, "Go, stay there." "Big brother." Yun Lan pouted and said unwillingly, "The 2 of you, pull her over." Yun Guichong pointed to the 2 disciples beside him and said. The 2 disciples looked at each other and walked to Yun Lan's side. They gave her a look. Yun Lan looked at the anger on Yun Guichong's face and then looked at Kai Zhuoxia's ashen face. She snorted and flew over with her magic power. After Yunlan flew away, Yun Guichong quickly bowed and said, "Fellow Kai, please don't blame her. Yunlan has always been spoiled in the family. The most annoying thing is that she's extremely spoiled by the ancestors. We can't punish her. Here, I apologize to you." Kai Zhuoxia smiled bitterly and bowed. She said it was fine. When the atmosphere eased a little, Yun Guichong smiled and said, "Fellow Kai, Lu Yang's Kai family only sent the two of you here for the Huanhua sect's disciple recruitment. Your sister, Fairy Hong Xiao, didn't come?" Huanhua sect's disciple recruitment. Kai Zhuoxia was stunned. Could it be that fellow Kai didn't come here from Luyang because of the Huanhua sect? Yun Guichong was also very curious when he saw Kai Zhuoxia in a daze. Kai Zhuoxia shook her head. "I came here because of other things. It's not because of the Huanhua sect." She then asked in confusion, "Doesn't the Huanhua sect recruit disciples every year?" "This year. -5. Chapter 14:11. Kai Zhuoxia asked curiously, "Doesn't the Huanhua sect accept disciples every year? Why is it so special this year? Why is it so grand?" "Haha, it seems that fellow Kai really doesn't know." Yun Guichong said with a smile, "In the past, the Huanhua sect didn't have any restrictions on accepting disciples. Anyone who had some cultivation, even if they were in the first level of the qi refining realm, could participate. Of course, the disciples they accepted were either servants or apprentices. There were very few disciples who could cultivate directly. Even the servants and apprentices who were accepted only had more opportunities to improve themselves, but other than that, they were not as good as the cultivator families." Kai Zhuoxia nodded with a smile and didn't say anything. She knew about this. However, this year is different. Yun Guichong paused and said with excitement, "This year, the Huanhua sect released news that only cultivators in the fourth level of the qi refining realm were allowed to participate in the selection. Those below the fourth level of the qi refining realm were not allowed to participate." Why is that?" Kai Zhuoxia was stunned and then said with surprise, Is there something special?" Yun Guichong looked around and glanced at Xiaohua. He said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, which family are you from? I don't look familiar. I'm afraid you're not a disciple of the Kai family." Xiaohua's face was as calm as water. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm Xiaohua, a rogue cultivator. Greetings, fellow Taoist Yun." "A rogue cultivator?" Yun Guichong frowned slightly. He turned his eyes and looked at Kai Zhuoxia. There was a hint of disdain in his eyes. However, the disdain was very faint and could not be detected by others. Yun Guichong then cupped his hands with a smile and said, "So it is fellow Taoist Xiao. It is fate that we meet." Ha ha ha. Then, Yun Guichong said to Xiaohua with a smile, "Since fellow Taoist Xiao is not a disciple of the cultivator families, I'm afraid you can't hear what I'm going to say next. If possible, please leave us alone." Xiaohua was slightly stunned and then smiled bitterly. He didn't say anything and activated his magic power to fly away. Kai Zhuoxia was not willing to let him go. She immediately called out, "Fellow Kai, please wait. What's the matter?" Xiaohua stopped. "Fellow Taoist Yun, if you have something to say, then say it. Why did you ask fellow Taoist Xiao to leave? After fellow Taoist Yun leaves, I will tell fellow Taoist Xiao. If fellow Taoist Yun feels that it's inappropriate, then I won't listen." Kai Zhuoxia said coldly. "This?" Yun Guichong's face was slightly embarrassed. His gaze shifted between the two of them a few times as if he was deep in thought. However, Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxia were both magnanimous, so there was nothing to be embarrassed about. After a while, Yun Guichong sighed and said with a smile, "Anyway, fellow cultivator Xiao will be a member of my family in the future. There's nothing wrong with saying it now." Kai Zhuoxia opened her mouth, wanting to refute, but in the end, she didn't say anything. Yun Guichong said in a low voice, "According to a reliable source from my Yun family, the reason why the Huanhua sect is choosing disciples from cultivators above the fourth layer of the qi refining realm is because the 3 cultivators selected this time can directly become the Huanhua sect's cultivation disciples." There's such a good thing? Kai Zhuoxia was a little surprised. "That's not all. If that was all, I wouldn't have to be so careful. Yuan Juchong smiled and said, the most important thing is that the Huanhua sect has an elder in the gold core stage who has not found a suitable disciple to pass on his skills. Among the 3 disciples selected this time, one of them is the one who can inherit the mantle of this elder. Fellow Taoist Kai, isn't this a wonderful thing that fell out of the blue? A gold core cultivator? Kai Zhuoxia was completely stunned. Then, she slapped her forehead and asked, This isn't a mistake, right? To be able to have a gold core cultivator as a teacher, foundation establishment, should be easy. Hee, fellow Taoist Kai's words are a little naive, but if you think about it, it's not impossible. At least, you have a much higher chance of success than my family. Io, when is the Huanhua sect selection? Kai Zhuoxia suddenly shouted. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't worry. It's in 20 days. There's still plenty of time. Yun Guichong said with a smile. If fellow Taoist Kai is willing, we can go together. But I don't know if my sister has received the news. Kai Zhuoxia said anxiously, with eyes cultivation, even if I go, I'll be at the bottom. Why would I find trouble for no reason? In my family, only my sister is qualified. Yun Guichong listened and nodded slightly. Fellow Taoist Kai, you're right. I also thought that your sister was beside you. Then, he said with a smile, all the cultivation families in the country of Shi have received the news. The Kai family of Luyang must also know. And, if you don't know by now, even if fellow Taoist Kai wants to inform your family, I'm afraid it's not enough. Hearing this, Kai Zhuoxia came to her senses and said with a bitter smile, faced with such a rare opportunity, I lost my sense of propriety. Excuse me. Perhaps your sister is already on her way. After 10 days, you can see her. Fellow Taoist Kai, do you want to go with us? Yun Guichong suggested. Kai Zhuoxia did want to go and have a look. She even wanted to try her luck. However, when she saw Xiaohua smiling and not saying anything, she cupped her hands and said to Yun Guichong, Fellow Taoist Yun, thank you for your kindness. I's cultivation is too low. My sister will go with you. I have other things to do. Well, if that's the case, then goodbye. I have to go there as soon as possible. Yun Guichong cupped his hands and said goodbye to Kai Zhuoxia and Xiaohua. Before he left, he looked at Xiaohua meaningfully. Are you kidding me? Looking at Yun Guichong's eyes, Xiaohua knew what was going on. He almost stomped his feet, but then he sneered and said to himself, Humph, Li Zongbao of the Utopia faction is the one in your heart. Just wait and see. When the time comes, Li Zongbao will dig out your eyeballs. However, Xiaohua was stunned. Damn it, this guy likes I, not Kai Zhuoxia. Why does he care about Li Zongbao? Alas, this Li Zongbao is really something. Kai Zhuoxia has neither the man nor the beauty. Why does he like her? Just as Xiaohua was thinking about this, Kai Zhuoxia flew over and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Xiao, please forgive me. Don't mention it. Xiaohua waved his hands quickly. What does this have to do with you? Alas, the relationship between the Kai family and the Yun family is hard to say. As the two of them walked, Kai Zhuoxia explained, back then, the Yun family suddenly came to our Kai family to propose marriage. It really made our Kai family flustered. Yun Guichong's reputation, appearance, and talent are all first-rate. He is worthy of my sister. However, at that time, my sister thought that she was still young, and she thought she wanted to marry I first, so she was a little hesitant. However, at that time, the Kai family of Qingyang sent a family order that the Kai family of Luyang was not allowed to marry Su Yenyun. Otherwise, the Kai family of Luyang would be expelled from the family tree. Although this order was abrupt, the Kai family of Luyang could not disobey it. After all, even if the Kai family of Luyang were to marry Su Yenyun, they could not completely protect the Kai family of Luyang. Therefore, the Kai family had to use the reason of my sister's young age to refuse first. Kai Zhuoxia smiled bitterly. Until last year, when I was about to go out for training, I found out that a female disciple of the Kai family of Qingyang wanted to have dual cultivation with Yun Guichong. That's why the family order came about. Oh, so that's how it is. This pretty boy is quite attractive. Xiaohua spat out. Gigolo? When Kai Zhuoxia heard this, She was flabbergasted at first, but soon after, she laughed so hard that she almost bent over. Only after a long while did she straighten up. Then she used her finger to point at Xiaohua, who was rubbing his nose and appeared to be very innocent, and said, "This guy is a 9th-level Qi refining cultivator. If he's a pretty boy, then all the disciples of the cultivation aristocratic families would be powerless people." Ha ha ha. Gigolo. This is the first time in my life that I've heard someone say that about Yun Guichong. Ha ha ha. Is it that funny? Xiaohua finally let out a breath and asked with a smile on his face. Although the encounter with Yun Guichong was a small interlude, Kai Zhuoxiao was obviously anxious for the next few days. Looking at her appearance, it was unclear whether she wanted to go to the Huanhua sect to see her so-called sister of Fairy Hongxia, or to try her luck at the Huanhua sect. In short, she was urging Xiaohua to hurry. Xuanyan school arrived 5 days later. From afar, they could already see a stretch of auspicious clouds lingering in the sky. Amidst the splendor, there were countless spirit birds flying up and down. It was like a fairyland. Xiaohua flew in the air and took a deep breath. The rich spiritual energy of heaven and earth hit him in the face. Xiaohua only needed to circulate his cultivation technique, and traces of spiritual energy were sucked into his meridians. Damn it, there's no mistake, right? Xiaohua cursed again. There seems to be some distance from here to Xuanyan cult. Why is the spiritual energy of heaven and earth so rich? If you can cultivate here, how can your cultivation progress be slow? Kai Zhuoxia covered her mouth and laughed. Let me tell fellow Kai, this Xuanyan cult is located in one of the famous paradises in the country of Xi, Xuanyan Mountain. Not only is there a fire vein, there are also spiritual mines. Otherwise, this Xuanyan cult wouldn't have been one of the 3 great cultivation sects. Then the auspicious clouds and splendor? Is it Xuanyan cult's protective array? Xiaohua pointed to the distance and asked, compared to Jinghua City's protective array? It can't be compared. It also can't be compared. Kai Zhuoxiao waved her hand and said, Jinghua City's strength might be able to challenge Xuanyan cult, but many people know of Jinghua City's 9 Flames, 10,000 Winds Grand Array and Heart-Cleansing Grand Array. And this Xuanyan cult has existed much longer than Jinghua City. What this protective array is, extremely few people know. As for power, fellow Taoist, how do you think it can be compared? That's also true. Xiaohua scratched his head and was just about to speak when he heard Kai Zhuoxiao remind him. Fellow Taoist Xiao, we're about to fall. We can't fly forward anymore. What? This seems to be far from Xuanyan cult. Xiaohua was stunned and asked curiously. Fellow Taoist Xiao really doesn't know. Kai Zhuoxiao smiled bitterly and said, you can't fly within 100 miles of Xuanyan cult. Cultivators who visit Xuanyan cult all have to wait in the guest pavilion. Sigh, isn't that so? Xiaohua also came to a realization. Flying was prohibited for a long distance in front of Jinghua City. One could only walk. This Xuanyan cult was naturally the same. The only difference was distance. -5. Chapter 14:12. It's just, that's 100 miles. If we walk, how long will it take? Xiaohua was somewhat confused. Well, I'll let fellow Taoist Xiao know. Without waiting for Kai Zhuoxiao's explanation, a dark green brilliance flashed not far from their feet. Soon after, a magic tool that looked like a small boat flew out from the foothills. There were several cultivators standing on it, and it went straight to the place overflowing with extraordinary splendor 100 miles away. I understand. Xiaohua slapped his forehead, looked at Kai Zhuoxiao's smiling face, and said, loose cultivators, as expected, their knowledge is shallow. I've let fellow Taoist Kai see a joke. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't belittle yourself. Kai Zhuoxiao pointed at the foothills on the other side and said, let's go there first. When Xiaohua and Kai Zhuoxiao descended from the sky and turned around a mountain range and saw the guest pavilion built against the mountain, Xiaohua was even more dumbstruck. He originally thought that the guest pavilion was just a pavilion used to welcome guests, and presumably it would be similar to Shang Huaming's guest pavilion. At most, it would be a lot bigger. However, when he saw the large number of pavilions built against the mountain, which almost occupied the entire foothills, he was speechless. Was this still a pavilion? The most peculiar thing was that this large number of pavilions were all built with jade. They were divided into 3 floors, and each floor had a different color. Moreover, each floor had a different style and style. Xiao Hua probably wanted to ask why the guest pavilion was divided into 3 floors, but just as he opened his mouth, a fiery red brilliance came from the side. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of the guest pavilion. It was a strange-shaped flying magic tool. Unlike Xiao Hua and the others, that flying magic tool didn't stop and directly flew to the 2nd floor of the guest pavilion. Xiao Hua understood that there were 2 foundation building cultivators on the flying magic tool. All right, Xiao Hua shut his mouth. Needless to say, this guest pavilion was divided by cultivation level. They were aura refining cultivators, so they could only go to the lowest floor. When the 2 of them were about 300 meters away from the pavilion, 2 boys with delicate features came up to them. They looked to be about 12 or 13 years old, but their cultivation bases were at the 5th layer of qi refining. The 2 boys smiled politely and cupped their fists. Xuanyan School's disciples, Ming Feng and Ming Cheng, greet senior brothers. May I know which sect you are from? What business do you have with my Xuanyan School? Kai Zhuoxia and Xiao Hua hurriedly returned the greeting. Kai Zhuoxia smiled obsequiously and said, I am Kai Zhuoxia, a disciple of Luyang's Kai family. I accompanied fellow Taoist Xiao to your esteemed sect for some private matters. The Kai family of Luyang? The eyes of Ming Feng, the boy at the front, turned slightly. He was somewhat puzzled as he asked, I wonder, what relationship does fellow Taoist Kai have with the Clear Yang Kai family? My Luyang Kai family is a branch of the Qingyang Kai family. Kai Zhuoxia explained awkwardly. Oh, so it's like that. Ming Feng cupped his hands and said, I've heard a little about it. I wonder if fellow Taoist Xiao Hua smiled and said, My name is Xiao Hua. I'm a rogue cultivator. I'm here today. A rogue cultivator? Upon hearing that Xiao Hua was a rogue cultivator, the other boy named Ming Cheng inadvertently frowned. He opened his mouth and interrupted Xiao Hua's words, saying, Fellow Taoist Xiao, my Xuanyan school doesn't have any dealings with rogue cultivators. I'm afraid we can't let fellow Taoist enter the pavilion. Please turn back, fellow Taoist Xiao. Xiao Hua was stunned. He didn't expect that the Xuanyan school's boy wouldn't wait for him to say anything and would drive him away. For a moment, he was somewhat at a loss for words. Fellow Taoist Kai, although cultivator aristocratic families have relations with my Xuanyan school, it's still necessary for official business. If it's a private matter, only disciples at the 10th layer of qi refining and above have the qualifications to enter my pavilion. As for rogue cultivators? Ming Cheng shot a glance at Xiao Hua and said, Only foundation establishment cultivators can enter my pavilion. We brothers have never received rogue cultivators before. Please turn back, fellow Taoist Kai. Ming Feng said with a smile. These 2 boys spoke in a cultured and refined manner. Their manners were also refined and courteous. Presumably, they had received systematic training from Xuanyan School. However, every word they spoke was also soaked with disdain for cultivator aristocratic families and rogue cultivators. Everywhere they spoke was filled with the arrogance of cultivator sects superior to others. Fellow Taoists, we don't have any urgent matters. We just wanna... Seeing this, Kai Zhuoxia hurriedly took half a step forward and said with a smile. However, she still didn't finish speaking. Ming Cheng waved his hand and said with a smile, Since it's not an urgent matter, and it's still a private matter, please leave, fellow Taoists. But Kai Zhuoxia looked anxious. She wanted to say something, but a streak of light flew over from the distance and landed not far behind Xiao Hua and company. It was a flying magic tool. Several disciples disembarked from the flying magic tool. They were all around the 10th layer of qi refining and wore the same attire. Seeing this, Ming Cheng and Ming Feng left Xiao Hua and Kai Zhuoxia and quickly stepped forward. They smiled and cupped their hands, saying, So it's senior martial brothers from 7 Possibilities sect. May I know what business you have with our Xuanyan school? I came to pay a visit under the orders of my master. This is my master's token. The 10th layer disciple in front took out a token and handed it over. Ming Cheng took it and said with a smile, May I know which master senior martial brother wants to visit? The disciple said his name. Ming Feng smiled and said, "Then I'll have to invite senior martial brothers to the guest pavilion for tea first. I'll send a message back to see if the master has time." "Thank you for your trouble, fellow Taoist." The disciple cupped his hands and thanked him. Then, he looked at Xiao Hua and Kai Zhuoxia and said casually, "These two fellow Taoists." Ming Cheng smiled and said, "One is a disciple from a cultivator clan and the other is an unknown rogue cultivator. Fellow Taoist, please follow me inside." The Seven Possibilities sect disciple looked down at Xiao Hua with a disdainful smile on his face. He walked in with his head held high. The other disciples also looked down at him with disdainful smiles. Xiao Hua's face was ashen. Kai Zhuoxia's face was also gloomy. After everyone entered, Xiao Hua let out a long breath and said, "Let's go. We're not people that those famous sects want to see." "But," Kai Zhuoxia clenched her teeth and walked to Xiao Hua's side. She said in a low voice, "But, we're asking them for help. Moreover, this isn't a big deal. The humiliation that my Luyang Kai clan suffered is far worse than this. Didn't you say that Su Yinyun clan wanted to form a marriage alliance with my Luyang Kai clan? That's just a leaf in the forest. Qingyang Kai clan alone can order me around, not to mention the three great sects of the country of Xi. Enduring humiliation will always be my cultivation clan's way of survival." After Xiao Hua heard this, he stared at the guest pavilion in front of him for a long time. His expression softened and he snorted. "Although a real man knows when to yield and when to stand tall, we cultivators are the most carefree. If it's not for transcendence, if it's not for freedom, who would give up their life and walk the path of cultivation? I'm just a loose cultivator. I can't stand the behavior of these great sects, so I don't care." Kai Zhuoxia smiled and said, "There are good and bad people in cultivation sections. Zhuo Qingyuan, fellow Taoist Zhuo gave fellow Taoist Xiao the summoning talisman. Isn't that the proof?" "Him?" Xiao Hua snorted again. He recalled Zhuo Qingyuan's palm strike at Jinghua City's E.G. He sneered and said, "They're just jackals of the same tribe. If he was sincere, why would he give him a summoning talisman? Why didn't he tell him about this guest pavilion?" "Sigh, fellow Taoist Xiao, fellow Taoist Zhuo is already good like this. Fellow Taoist Xiao shouldn't misunderstand him." Kai Zhuoxia persuaded Xiao Hua, who wasn't clear about the matter between Xiao Hua and Zhuo Qing. Xiao Hua knew Kai Zhuoxia's thoughts and sighed. "How about I send out the summoning talisman?" "Don't do that." Kai Zhuoxia hurriedly waved her hand. Xuanyan School's guest pavilion is Xuanyan School's only contact with the outside world. If fellow Taoist Zhuo is in the sect, then he must pass through the guest pavilion. If fellow Taoist Xiao sends out a summoning talisman, let's not talk about whether the message can be sent in. Even if the message can be sent in, it will also implicate fellow Taoist Zhuo. This won't do, that won't do either. Then what should we do? Xiao Hua stretched out his hand, somewhat helpless. This Mingxing and Mingfeng look cultured and refined, but we didn't even say our purpose in coming and we were rejected. Let's wait. Kai Zhuoxia smiled bitterly. We have a request, so we can only lower our posture. Xiao Hua was helpless and could only accompany Kai Zhuoxia to stand guard in front of Xuanyan School's guest pavilion. Unknowingly, 3 days passed very quickly. In front of Xuanyan School's guest pavilion, there were many cultivators coming and going. Some came to visit, some Xuanyan School's disciples went out on business. The guest pavilion's disciples also appeared many times, but everyone turned a blind eye to Xiao Hua and Kai Zhuoxia. They only swept a few glances and ignored them. At first, Xiao Hua still had some hope. When he saw the guest pavilion's disciples, he still took a look. Later, he simply closed his eyes and stood there, immersing his mind into space and carefully comprehending the heavenly Tao's ascension realm. And at the same time, the dragonization art, nameless mnemonic chant, and so on in his body were also slowly cultivated. Looking at Kai Zhuoxia again, her face was filled with anxiety. But in these 3 days, every time she saw the guest pavilion's disciples, she would greet them with a smile. Even if they ignored her, she would still smile and nod as a greeting. On this day, the sun had just risen. Several groups of Xuanyan School's disciples went out again. Kai Zhuoxia finally couldn't bear it anymore. She walked in front of Xiao Hua and said, "Forget it, fellow Taoist Xiao. What? Enduring humiliation doesn't work anymore? Xiao Hua opened his eyes and said very calmly, actually, if you want to endure humiliation, you might as well go directly to the utmost happiness faction. Hearing the utmost happiness faction, Kai Zhuoxia's expression changed. Just as she was about to open her mouth, a cultivator around the 8th level of the Qi refining stage walked out from the guest pavilion. That cultivator walked straight in front of Kai Zhuoxia and asked, "Fellow Taoists, you've been waiting at my Xuanyan school for a long time. Do you have any important business?" Hearing this, Kai Zhuoxia's face was filled with joy. She cupped her hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, please know, the two of us have come to pay a visit to fellow Taoist Zhua Qingyuan. Fellow Taoist, please pass on the message. Senior Martial Brother Zhua Qingyuan?" That cultivator was slightly dazed. Why didn't fellow Taoist say so earlier? Nonsense. Xiao Hua at the side sneered in his heart. I also need to have a chance to say it. Hee, your honorable school has a lot of business. We don't dare to disturb small matters. If fellow Taoist has free time, please help pass on the message. Kai Zhuoxia smiled obsequiously. She clapped her hands and several mid-grade spirit stones were handed over. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for it. -5. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.